A joyous toast rings out under the warm glow of the grand chandelier as glasses of red wine clink together. An imperial banquet celebrating the victory in the Kifrin War is underway. The opulence of this place is almost too much for some to bear, making me think that maybe I should just head back now.
I wonder where Uncle and Bella are. Meanwhile, other ladies whisper in admiration, commenting on how dazzling Lady Listerwell looks today.
A guest compliments Bella, calling her the true golden rose of Genoa as she enters the ballroom in her breathtaking white gown. Bella smiles back with perfect grace, her radiant blonde hair and glittering green eyes captivating everyone around her. Flanked by her uncle, Bella stands at the center of attention as the surrounding guests shower her with compliments and admiration. Her uncle laughs warmly, saying that he can't take the credit because it is all thanks to her growing up so wonderfully on her own. Bella stands modestly amidst the crowd, the glittering ballroom reflecting the praise surrounding her. In the quiet, distant corners of the mind, a voice wonders what her nickname was again. A soft sigh escapes her lips as she is suddenly reminded of the reality she cannot escape. Standing in her dark, somber dress, Harriet looks on with a sorrowful expression, completely detached from the festive atmosphere. It was a night in Genoa, filled with sparkling stars as always. That was the night a young girl's life was completely upended, forever changing her destiny under the starry sky. Lanterns illuminate the lakeside as a frantic search begins, the sparkling waters reflecting the sudden dread of the night. The couple who went for a boat ride never returned, leaving only a sinking lantern beneath the deep, dark water. A heavy rain pours down over the church, as if the heavens themselves are weeping for the tragedy. Fresh white flowers are laid upon the cold, rain-soaked tombs, a final farewell to those who were lost. But fortunately, amidst the tragedy, a kind uncle was there to take the lonely child in, offering a glimmer of hope to her despair. Little Bella, with her bright green eyes and golden hair, smiles warmly like a blooming yellow rose. In stark contrast, young Harriet stands weeping, holding onto her white flower with a heavy heart. A stunning lady in a deep blue gown commands the attention of the gentlemen around her, walking with effortless allure. Bearing thorns and tainting the family name, she became known as the notorious scandal maker of Genoa. This is the rumor about me. Standing behind a pillar, I finally heard the very words I was dreading all along. Seeing Harriet slip away, Bella watches quietly, while Harriet thinks to herself that she should slip away before she is noticed. Slipping through the dark, quiet corridors, Harriet is startled as a warm light suddenly illuminates her path. Two gentlemen carrying lanterns approach from the distance, prompting a quiet gasp of surprise from Harriet. In the safety of the darkened hall, a secret encounter takes place as a man kneels before a lady. The lady inspects the sparkling blue gemstone in her hand with a silent, secret satisfaction. He had come to retrieve what he left with her, their silent transaction completed in the shadows. Still, I can't help but wonder if, by some miracle, things could be different. Reaching out her hand toward a warm, glowing light, she wonders if anyone at all would come to her and if she could finally escape this hell. Suddenly, Bella grasps Harriet's hand with a bright and cheerful call, breaking her solitary thoughts. Bella beams with a radiant, affectionate smile, genuinely happy to have found her sister. Harriet looks at her in surprise, a sense of apprehension rising within her as she thinks, "Don't tell me." The other ladies turn their heads, whispering and watching the two sisters standing side by side. Bella explains to the curious guests with a bright smile, saying that Harriet just looked a bit lonely by herself. The ladies gossip amongst themselves, their polite smiles hiding their critical and judgmental thoughts. Harriet looks back in shock, her eyes widening as she spots a magnificent red jewel pinned to her dress. Staring at the massive ruby glittering with diamonds, Harriet wonders in disbelief if that is really a brooch. The guests maliciously whisper, questioning why Harriet of all people would have it, guessing some old mogul pinned it on her, and mocking the outdated style of the huge ruby. Bella smiles beautifully, covering her laugh as she tries to downplay the whispers and ease the tension. Feeling the heavy weight of their critical eyes, Harriet clutches her dress in distress, wanting nothing more than to hide the jewel. Looking closely at the exquisite piece, Harriet resolves that she will have to return it wherever they come to claim it. The red ruby gleams with immense brilliance, surrounded by a halo of flawless diamonds. Bella laughs delightedly, her cheerful demeanor filling the air with warmth. Bella happily suggests pinning it on Harriet's chest like this, ignoring Harriet's flustered protests of Bella. Harriet looks at Bella with a complex mixture of surprise, bewilderment, and quiet emotion. Bella insists with bright confidence that the gentleman definitely intended to confess his feelings, though Harriet doubts it, replying that she doesn't think it was a confession at all. Harriet looks down somberly, reminding herself that expecting something for no reason only leads to greater disappointment. Suddenly, a tall and handsome gentleman with silver blonde hair and striking red eyes appears, stepping right up to Harriet as she turns around to face him. The handsome gentleman with striking red eyes and golden blonde hair gazes forward with a calm but intense focus. Harriet turns back in shock, her eyes wide as she realizes who is standing right behind her. The crowd's whispers reveal his true identity. He is none other than Duke Kailas, the grand hero of the victory banquet. Flustered and nervous, Harriet clutches her hands together under the watchful eyes of the surrounding guests. Shockwaves ripple through the ballroom as the other noble ladies gasp in surprise at his sudden appearance. Bella covers her mouth in disbelief, unable to comprehend why the high and mighty Duke would approach them. Dark, judgmental whispers begin to echo through the ballroom, questioning if the Duke really gave the brooch to Harriet. The malicious gossip grows harsher as the guests accuse Harriet of stealing the precious jewel just to show off. The eyes of high society glare with malice, wondering what kind of scandalous trouble Harriet is trying to stir up this time. Desperate to defuse the situation, Harriet tries to unpin the massive ruby, but her hair gets hopelessly tangled in it. Before she can free herself, the Duke steps in close, towering over her with an intimidating presence. Their eyes meet in a tense, silent standoff, her golden eyes reflecting fear, while his crimson eyes look down with cold suspicion. The Duke reaches out his gloved hand toward the brilliant red ruby brooch pinned to her chest. In a low, commanding voice, the Duke addresses her directly, calling her "my lady," as a tense hush falls over the room. He demands to know who is responsible for this preposterous situation, his tone sending a shiver down her spine. Holding the ruby brooch tightly in his hand, his voice drops as he asks how his father's precious keepsake ended up here. With a stern, unyielding expression, he demands to know why it is pinned to the chest of a lady he doesn't even know. Harriet stands frozen in utter humiliation as he asks how she plans to take responsibility for such an insult. Standing under the bright, glittering chandelier, the Duke warns that this matter is far too heavy to be dismissed as a childish prank. Memories of the brutal war surface, where battle flags fluttered over the rain-soaked, war-torn fields. On that muddy battlefield, the Duke fought relentlessly, his face covered in blood and sweat as he led his troops. Amidst the agony and despair of the wounded soldiers, the Duke knelt on the wet ground, carrying the heavy burden of war. And through it all, the only thing that kept him going was the memory of his father's missing keepsake. Now that sacred memento is pinned to the chest of a notorious troublemaker, making it look as though she is desperately begging for his affection. Harriet tries to stammer out an explanation about a misunderstanding, but the guests mock her, believing the guilty always hide behind that word. Looking down at her with absolute disdain, the Duke asks if she truly expected him to turn a blind eye to this. Harriet looks at him with wide, pleading eyes, desperately trying to find the words to prove her innocence. Suddenly, a panicked voice calls out Harriet's name as her uncle rushes through the crowd toward them. Bowing deeply before the Duke, her uncle frantically apologizes, taking full blame for failing to keep his niece in line. In a brutal display of submission, her uncle forcefully pushes Harriet's head down, forcing her to bow in humiliation. Harriet trembles as she clutches her dress, her pride completely shattered under the cold, silent gaze of the Duke. Seeing an opportunity, Bella steps forward with a gentle expression, attempting to ease the Duke's anger. Bella looks up at him with a sweet, sympathetic smile, playing the role of the perfect, caring sister. In the background, the other ladies whisper and snicker behind their fans, thoroughly enjoying Harriet's public downfall. Guests maliciously gossip, laughing about how Harriet is always so desperate to flirt with every man she sees. Clasping her dress tightly, Harriet feels like a fool for briefly believing that things could ever be different for her. Her uncle grabs her firmly, pulling her away from the center of the ballroom as the crowd continues to whisper. Harriet looks back one last time, her eyes filled with a deep, sorrowful resignation as she is led away. Facing the Duke, Harriet quietly states that she never wanted anything like that brooch in the first place. As another guest calls out to the Duke, he stands tall, his profile stern and unbothered by the dramatic scene. Turning to the bowing family, the Duke coldly declares that he has had enough, cutting off the awkward apologies. Holding the reclaimed brooch pinned to his own chest, the Duke notes that while there was no intent to insult him, the matter is now settled. The Duke walks away into the grand hallway, leaving Harriet, Bella, and their uncle standing in his shadow. Back home, Harriet stands in the quiet library, surrounded by towering bookshelves as she reflects on the night's disaster. Stepping into her uncle's dimly lit office, she prepares herself to face the inevitable anger of her family. Harriet calls out to her uncle, hoping that he will at least listen to her side of the story. She desperately pleads her innocence, explaining that she would never dare to touch the Duke's precious brooch. Without warning, her uncle swings his hand and delivers a violent slap across her face, sending her reeling. Shouting at her to be quiet, her uncle furiously smashes a flower vase, shattering it into pieces on the floor. Collapsing onto the floor amidst the broken glass, Harriet weeps in pain, clutching her bruised cheek as her uncle points a furious finger at her. If we offend the Duke's family right now, we're finished. Harriet, you know we're doing all this for you, so do as your uncle says. Harriet weeps silently, clutching her hand to her face as a tear streams down her cheek, her golden eyes filled with deep sorrow and despair. A kind uncle and his family who took in an orphan who lost her parents. A close-up of the portrait reveals a young, beautiful Bella with bright golden hair and striking green eyes, smiling gently. I only replied to his letter. Harriet, please help Bella out. We can't let Bella marry just any man. But how am I supposed to... let's say you were the one who wrote the reply. Just this once, become the main character of this scandal. You'll help me, right? Harriet looks on with a heavy heart as a gloved hand firmly squeezes her shoulder, silently pressuring her to submit. Harriet, I want to continue supporting you out of the goodness of my heart. Don't make me regret taking you in. Help me out, just like last time? Harriet, this time too. Help me just one more time. Harriet, this is really the last time. You can help me, right? Your family, after all. Her uncle stands tall over Harriet, clutching his coat as she remains collapsed on the floor in her dark red gown, utterly defeated. A warm memory surfaces of a young, blonde Bella reaching her hand out under an umbrella held by her father in the pouring rain. In contrast, a young Harriet stands alone in a cemetery during a heavy downpour, clutching a single white chrysanthemum and weeping in front of a grave as a hand reaches out to her. I truly have nothing left. I'll do as you say, Uncle. Look at all these letters piling up. They're all party invitations, right? Because you're the golden rose of Genoa. Bella's slender hand lifts a luxurious, multi-layered pearl necklace from her vanity table, where a silver hairpin rests beside a vase of vibrant pink roses. By the way, I thought we were in big trouble yesterday. I asked you to steal a brooch from a man who could create an embarrassing situation, but Duke Kailas's brooch? Seriously, what if the sparks flew and hit me? In the privacy of her room, Bella leans over the back of a chair to plant a sweet, secret kiss on a dark-haired gentleman's lips. And I might have even caught the Duke's eye. A close-up of Bella's sharp, calculating green eye hints at the cunning nature hiding behind her beautiful, innocent facade. She recalls a tense moment from the banquet where she watched the cold, silver-haired Duke Kailas walk away. Duke Kailas glares with a sharp, intimidating focus, his striking red eyes burning with cold suspicion. Ouch! Are you thinking about another man right now? Of course not. There's no man quite like you, Tez. Bella sits gracefully on the plush edge of the bed, her golden hair reflecting the soft, warm light as she smiles cheerfully. I'll give you a reward for handling that annoying chore so well. Bella turns her head slightly, her gaze softening as she absorbs his praise with quiet satisfaction. Just because. She gets on my nerves. Under a clear blue sky, a wooden polo mallet swings forcefully, striking a white ball with immense speed and power. The players are having a good game today. Two gentlemen chat amiably on the marble balcony, one holding a glass of champagne as they enjoy the pleasant afternoon. From behind, a gentleman sits comfortably on an outdoor sofa, observing the polo match and the socializing nobles on the terrace. Dressed in a fine vest and tie, a handsome gentleman with short golden hair sits in quiet contemplation, his sharp profile exuding a calm authority. Yes, for a whole year. The gentlemen continue their lively discussion, gesturing expressively as they converse on the sun-drenched balcony. Listerwell too, didn't you? Weren't you played for a fool at the last masquerade because you couldn't tell the two apart? No matter how dark it was, how could you mistake Harriet Listerwell for Bella Listerwell? The gentleman burst into hearty laughter on the balcony, while another man sits silently, tightly clenching his hands together in annoyance. How unpleasant. A wide shot reveals the Duke sitting alone and aloof on a plush sofa, completely detached from the group of gossiping nobles further down the balcony. I never wanted anything like that in the first place. Cedric. A hand reaches out, offering a sparkling glass of white wine to the Duke. Head of the Kingsley Earldom, Benedict Kingsley. A handsome gentleman with light brown hair approaches Cedric with a friendly smile, asking if they can chat for a moment. Cedric turns around on the sunlit balcony as the gentleman joins him to converse. The gentleman offers a warm, knowing smile as they begin their private conversation. Looking out over the field where a rider gallops on horseback, the gentleman notices Cedric seems to have lost weight and kindly asks if he is eating properly, to which Cedric simply replies, "Of course." Walking down the grand, sunlit balcony, the man advises Cedric to pull himself together both physically and mentally to lead the duchy, offering his support whenever difficulties arise. With a gentle, supportive smile, the gentleman warmly pats Cedric's shoulder as a gesture of encouragement. As Cedric takes a sip of his sparkling white wine under the clear sky, thoughts of his father resurface in his mind. He remembers being a small, innocent infant wrapped snugly in a warm blanket, cradled in his mother's loving arms. His mother sat gracefully on the lush grass under the shade of a tall pillar, holding her precious child as she quietly reflected on how stifling his father could sometimes be to those around him. Back on the balcony, the gentleman reaches into his coat pocket and pulls out a sealed letter, sliding it toward Cedric. Cedric looks at the letter with cold, focused red eyes as the gentleman suggests that it might be a good opportunity for him to make an appearance. In polite terms, a businessman, he thinks, staring at the envelope secured tightly with a dark red wax seal. The gentleman advises that as the new head of the family, he must pay attention to his relationships with his vassals, while Cedric internally characterizes him as nothing more than a cunning merchant who exploits people for personal gain. Staring out over the terrace, Cedric finishes his drink, knowing that no matter how much his uncle resembles his father, he could never truly see him as a father figure. The gentleman laughs heartily, delighted by Cedric's cooperative attitude, and exclaims, "Oh, yes, good thinking." Staring at the vibrant green leaves of a potted plant on the terrace, Cedric silently reminds himself that while poisonous weeds are growing everywhere and need to be weeded out, rushing the process will only ruin his plans. Looking up at the clear sky, Cedric decides that it is best to let his enemies enjoy the pleasant breeze and lower their guard for a while. As his uncle asks which polo team he thinks will win and brags about picking the winning team, Cedric plays along, resolving to act like nothing more than an obedient greenhorn for the time being. A wooden carriage rattles along a quiet dirt road, passing through a scenic field of golden grass. Inside the carriage, Harriet sits quietly in her modest gown, holding her suitcase tightly as the sunlight streams through the window. As the carriage continues to sway, Harriet holds up a letter filled with elegant cursive handwriting. She recalls her uncle sitting at the dining table, indifferently promising that she would have a hefty marriage fund waiting for her upon her return. Her uncle had coldly ordered her to reflect on her actions and remain as quiet as possible during her exile at the convent. Standing at the edge of the lavishly decorated dining hall, Harriet had been harshly dismissed and asked why she was dawdling instead of leaving immediately. She remembers the deep sting of alienation as her family dined comfortably at the far end of the long table, treating her like an unwanted stranger. Looking down at her open suitcase, Harriet anxiously recalls hearing how incredibly harsh and freezing the winters at the convent can be. Her stomach rumbles hungrily as she stares at her limited belongings, trying to reassure herself that her uncle will surely send whatever she needs. She is reminded once again of her position in that household, always left out, just like in the family portrait where she was never included. Lost in her sorrow, she feels utterly isolated, as if she is sitting in pitch darkness with no one to turn to. She lets out a soft, heavy sigh, her golden eyes downcast as she faces her bleak future. Suddenly, a sudden jolt of the carriage startles her, pulling her out of her deep thoughts. With a soft click, the door opens and Terry, the kind driver, peers in with a warm, friendly smile. Having fallen onto the carriage floor amidst her spilled books and belongings due to the sudden stop, Harriet smiles reassuringly and explains that a squirrel had suddenly crossed their path. Terry sheepishly scratches his head, feeling terribly sorry for the rough jolt as he hands back a small box that had fallen. Harriet suddenly freezes in surprise as her eyes widen at what she sees inside her fallen items. It is a precious, half-burned photograph of herself as a young girl standing happily beside her parents, whose faces have been tragically torn away. She carefully touches the worn edges of the torn photo, a bittersweet warmth filling her heart as she gazes at her childhood self. Harriet softly calls out Terry's name as he stands by the carriage door, looking at her with genuine kindness. She looks up at him gratefully as the gentle breeze flows through the open carriage door. Terry extends his hands, offering her a neatly wrapped parcel tied with a simple black string. Terry politely bows as he presents the humble food package, hoping to offer her some comfort on her long journey. Harriet gasps softly, deeply touched by the unexpected kindness of the carriage driver. Outside, the little squirrel that had caused the sudden stop happily scurries away into the grassy field. The wild reeds sway gracefully in the warm wind, creating a soothing rustle under the afternoon sun. Feeling a quiet peace settle over her, Harriet gazes out with a soft, gentle expression. Surrounded by the vast golden field of reeds, Terry looks up at the sky and remarks on how crisp and refreshing the country air is. Sitting comfortably in his driver's seat, Terry closes his eyes in blissful relaxation while a small yellow bird rests quietly on his cap. She fondly remembers her childhood, where she would happily share delicious fruit tarts with Terry, always bringing a bright smile to his face. As the carriage continues its journey toward the magnificent sunset, she holds on to Terry's reassuring words that the sun will surely rise again for her. Squeezing the warm parcel tightly against her chest, Harriet smiles with genuine gratitude and whispers, "Thank you, Mr. Terry." A dark wooden cross hanging on the patterned wallpaper of a quiet, solemn room glows faintly in the sunlight. Yes, Abbess Catherine. It's quite a long time for a young lady coming here to reflect on her actions. They say she was at the center of a famous scandal in Genoa's high society. Abbess Catherine listens quietly, her expression remaining calm and unreadable behind her spectacles. The convent is devolving into a shelter for troublesome young ladies, but with the financial support from the Holy See practically being cut off, clasping her hands tightly around her dark rosary beads, the abbess quietly reflects on the convent's difficult situation. Keep a particularly close eye on this incoming young lady, the abbess instructs the two novice sisters standing before her. The brown-haired novice gasps in surprise, while her blonde companion remains quiet and composed as they receive their orders. Fiddling with her wooden cross necklace, the abbess gazes thoughtfully toward the bright window. Looking down from her window, the abbess watches a young lady slowly walking along the winding dirt path leading to the convent. Hedonism, she thinks, watching Harriet carry her suitcase through the vast, sun-drenched field. Harriet swallows hard, holding back her tears as she walks toward her new, uncertain life. Beneath her gown, a little squirrel and a small yellow bird happily nibble on some nuts on the ground. Under the brilliant sunset, Harriet walks determinedly toward the grand buildings of St. Clarissa Convent. The weather has gotten quite cool. St. Clarissa Convent really is nice. Give a little donation and you can live comfortably for a month or two. On the balcony, noble ladies chat behind their fans, enjoying the pleasant afternoon breeze. I bet she's throwing a massive tantrum somewhere right now. What will she do without any men in the convent? Two novice sisters push open the heavy wooden doors and step out onto the terrace. "I told you, you don't have to move it all at once," the blonde sister says, watching her friend carry a heavy load of laundry. "Sister Agnes, Sister Emma," Harriet calls out warmly as she approaches them, carrying a large wooden bucket filled with lavender. "You should have asked for help with something this heavy." "You came out so early again today. You really don't need to come out this early," Sister Emma replies, wiping the sweat from her brow as Harriet smiles. It seems she impersonated her cousin to seduce men. She's probably going to be fierce and terrifying, Sister Emma worries, visualizing the glamorous, scandalous woman. There is always a fitting reason for coming here. Keep a particularly close eye on this incoming young lady, and let us fulfill the duties entrusted to us. I thought you could participate directly in making soap starting today. We will boil olive oil, water, and soda in a pot, and you have to stir it continuously without stopping. You must be careful, as you could get burned if you make a mistake, Emma explains, glancing back at Harriet. "Ah," is what I was imagining she'd say, Emma thinks to herself, nervously expecting a spoiled noble lady to complain about the hard labor. "Yes, thank you. I'll do," Harriet replies with a bright, cheerful smile, completely defying Emma's expectations. "Should I use this paddle to stir?" "Yes," Emma stammers, surprised by Harriet's enthusiastic attitude. Harriet eagerly rolls up her sleeves and begins stirring the large, steaming cauldron of soap mixture. Making soap out of oil? It's amazing no matter how many times I see it. Ah, yes, if you handle high-quality olive oil properly, it becomes incredibly mild. That's a shame for those ladies, Emma thinks, her expression softening as she realizes how sweet and hardworking Harriet truly is. Harriet wipes her brow with a gloved hand, her face lit up by the warm glow of the soap workshop. The two girls chat and laugh happily together, enjoying each other's company as they work. Watching them from across the room, the blonde novice sister, Agnes, plucks herb leaves with a cold, suspicious expression, to be won over by just a few nice words. I thought she'd be no different, Agnes thinks coldly, walking down the corridor of the convent alone with a lantern. Back in the workshop, Agnes continues plucking the green leaves, her gaze fixed sharply on Harriet. Agnes glares with a sharp, piercing focus, determined to find the cunning nature she believes Harriet is hiding. The soap business that the sisters work so hard on for the convent's funds is a very important task here. Just like Mr. Terry said, the sun always shines brightly here, and they serve healthy meals. Harriet sits quietly in her room at night, staring out at the crescent moon with a peaceful expression. I used to get an upset stomach all the time at Uncle's house and was always taking medicine. Staring at the half-burned childhood photograph on her windowsill, Harriet whispers, "Is it truly because this place is blessed with Yahweh's grace? Mom? Dad? This is a truly wonderful party, Lord Kingsley." "A special toast," a gentleman announces, standing on the balcony as guests gather in the grand hall below. Standing near the balcony railing, a handsome gentleman with short brown hair looks around the crowded ballroom with a thoughtful expression. The gentleman turns his head as another man approaches him on the sunlit upper terrace, ready to begin a private conversation. A label introduces the elegant gentleman as Lord Albert Kingsley of the County of Kingsley. Standing on a high balcony overlooking the grand sunlit ballroom, a gentleman places a hand on Albert's shoulder and calls out, "Albert." The gentleman turns his face, smiling with a look that is both charming and confident. With steady and composed steps, a handsome blonde gentleman walks across the polished checkered floor of the grand ballroom. From the top of the wide staircase, the host of the evening welcomes his prestigious guests to the grand gathering. Stepping up to the blonde gentleman with wine glasses in hand, a guest politely taps him on the shoulder, prompting him to softly say, "I apologize." Guests at the party remark that seeing the blonde gentleman makes it feel as if the previous twin brother Duke is still with them, noting that having Count Kingsley present must be a great comfort to his grace. With a polite smile, the blonde gentleman introduces the newcomers, saying, "Cedric, these are the gentlemen I mentioned earlier." Duke Cedric, a handsome dark-haired gentleman with striking green eyes, stands quietly, looking forward with a serious and unreadable expression. Under a bright, clear sky, the Grand Palace stands tall, hosting the quarterly luncheon regularly held by the Empress. The narration explains how the duty of escorting the grandmother was passed to Uncle Rowan, who by chance encountered Princess Jeremiah at his very first luncheon attendance. Inside the Grand Cathedral, a beautiful wedding ceremony takes place between a noble gentleman in uniform and his bride in a white gown. From the balcony, a hand tightly grips the wooden railing in frustration as they look down at the bustling crowd below. Looking down from above, a group of distinguished guests gather in a circle, eagerly chatting with a beautiful blonde-haired lady in a lavish yellow dress. The blonde lady walks gracefully through the crowd as she reflects on her cold mindset. To me, business is using people. A banquet table is laden with delicious croissants, delicate tarts, and bottles of fine Moscato wine. Flirting and laughing behind her gloved hand, the blonde lady expertly keeps the attention of the gentlemen surrounding her. A close-up shows the blonde lady smiling with sheer satisfaction, her elegant ruby earrings catching the light. In a lavishly decorated room, a mother and daughter discuss their relief now that Harriet is no longer around to interfere, while another voice agrees, "Your mother is right." Smoking a cigar with a self-satisfied smirk, her father advises, "You must find him while people still see you as the Golden Rose of Genoa, a husband worthy of you." Gazing down at her elegant gown and bow-adorned shoes, the blonde lady confidently tells herself that she deserves a man worthy of her. Looking at the blonde gentleman, she determinedly reflects that the man who claims her hand must be absolutely worthy of her glittering reputation. She gazes at the blonde gentleman across the room, thinking to herself that he must be the most radiant of them all. Moving through the crowd, she intentionally bumps into the handsome blonde gentleman, softly gasping, "Oh my." Raising a glass of sparkling champagne, she smiles with breathtaking grace, her green eyes shimmering. The handsome blonde gentleman looks down at her with a cool and unimpressed gaze. Standing before him, she elegantly holds her dress and says, "We met at the victory banquet." She looks up at him, her bright green eyes wide with expectation. Surrounded by party guests, the two of them stand close together, holding up their glasses for a toast. Leaning in close, the blonde gentleman gazes coldly into her eyes and whispers sharply, "I do not wish to be unpleasantly entangled with you." With those harsh words, the gentleman calmly turns on his heel and walks away, leaving her standing alone in stunned silence. On the balcony, onlookers whisper to one another, wondering if the two had made plans to meet, what secret conversation they were having, and noting how good they looked together. As the blonde gentleman walks away, the lady stands amidst the crowd, watching his departing back with frustration. Another noble lady quickly approaches her in excitement, exclaiming, "The atmosphere was quite something. It was as if you two were—" The lady giggles and covers her mouth, feigning bashfulness as the other woman gasps, "Oh my goodness." Clasping her hands, she pretends to be shy and embarrassed, squealing, "Aw, tell," to keep up her glamorous image. As she walks away, several gentlemen try to win her attention, offering to escort her or invite her for tea, but she politely declines, saying she simply needs a place to rest. Walking across the vast, checkered ballroom floor, she thinks bitterly to herself, "I am the Rose of Genoa, praised by everyone, and yet, why do I feel—" Looking down with a frustrated, dark expression, she wonders in annoyance, like everything is exactly the damn same? She walks alone through a dim, quiet corridor, her heavy footsteps echoing as she thinks, "Is it because of Harriet?" Turning her head slightly, she looks back into the darkness, her mind consumed by the thought of her cousin. "Harriet, Harriet." As the sound of firm footsteps approaches her in the dark hallway, she narrows her green eyes and thinks, "Harriet Listerwell." Stepping out of the shadows, Lord Albert politely calls out to her, "Lady Listerwell." She looks up in surprise as Albert walks over, asking what brings her out there and noting that her complexion looked clouded with worry. She smiles softly, hiding her true thoughts behind a sweet facade as she replies, "Did it?" while identifying him in her mind as the son of Count Benedict Kingsley. She looks closely at Lord Albert, noting that he is not the kind of person she would typically run into in a quiet place like this. She sighs softly and tells him, "Actually, there was a misunderstanding with Duke Cedric, a ridiculous misunderstanding that I am in love." Standing together before the massive cathedral window, she looks at Albert and thinks, "A sweet man who is soon to inherit a count's title. What a shame." In a flashback, she recalls how he is already promised to another, that he's already engaged to Daphne Laurel. Looking closely at the memory of Daphne Laurel, a sudden thought crosses her mind. No, wait. Lady Listerwell hugs Lord Albert Kingsley from behind, her green eyes shimmering with a mixture of hope and calculation as she clings to him. She reflects on what a businessman truly wants in a partner, something Daphne lacks, but she possesses in abundance, confident in her own strengths. Her ambition is boundless, aiming to reach higher until every shining thing is in her hands. She tells him that the world he looks upon as the heir to the Kingsley Countdom must be much broader. She looks up at him with shimmering green eyes, thinking of how he could open that path of high society and wealth for her. Lord Albert gently but firmly takes hold of her gloved hand, interrupting her advance. As he holds her hand close to his chest, Albert asks if she can prove to him her value. Looking down at her with a calm but piercing gaze, Albert asks why he should choose her over his fiancée, Daphne. With absolute confidence, she looks up at him and sweetly replies, "Of course." In high society, ladies gossip about Daphne and Albert, whispering that they are on the verge of breaking off their engagement and laughing that the boring Daphne is surely the one being dumped. They dismiss Daphne's status as a count's daughter, mocking her inability to do anything useful and noting her absence from high society under the excuse of poor health. She sits up in bed beside him under the warm light of the lamp, confidently saying yes. She looks down at him mockingly, thinking of Daphne, who remains completely oblivious that her fiancé is in bed with another woman. As they share an intimate embrace, Albert murmurs that he figured as much, noting how well she leaked the rumors to high society. She closes her eyes in satisfaction, thinking that Daphne is completely finished and that she only needs to maintain her perfect woman act until the engagement is officially settled. While she embraces him with a triumphant smile, Albert stares into the distance with a cold, unreadable expression. She looks away thoughtfully, reflecting that it would be highly troublesome if she were dragged down again by the reputation of being the cousin of a scandal maker. Back at the peaceful convent, Harriet walks through the courtyard alongside another sister, carrying fresh laundry as golden autumn leaves drift down around them. As the seasons change, winter sets in, covering the grand stone cathedral and its courtyard in a beautiful, quiet blanket of falling snow. Carrying bundles of firewood through the chilly stone corridor, they worry that they barely have enough wood to keep the soap workshop running. They are startled to see Sister Agnes walking down the corridor holding a tiny baby, with two small, curious children following closely behind her. Sister Agnes holds the baby protectively, looking concerned and slightly overwhelmed by the sudden arrival of the children. Sister Agnes explains that they are taking in some of the local children to care for them for a few days. Harriet crouches down to their level, warmly extending her hand to welcome the shy and hesitant children. The three children stare back with wide, innocent eyes, looking curious yet hesitant about the friendly sister before them. Inside the warm, firelit room, Agnes says that they just need to change their clothes, feed them, and put them safely to sleep. Looking at the garments they brought out, Harriet hesitantly asks if they are really going to dress the children in those clothes. She holds up a heavily patched, worn-out bundle of clothing and notes with a gentle frown that they are incredibly worn out. Looking around the humble room, Harriet sadly realizes that the convent's financial situation is far worse than she had ever imagined. Agnes looks up from the children and asks Sister Harriet if she would mind coming along with her to help. As they carry trays of simple food down the hall, Agnes worries that baby Megan must be crying again, saying she should hurry back. Suddenly, a haughty noble lady with reddish hair blocks their path, complaining loudly that if the convent accepted their money, it should at least keep things quiet. She angrily demands if they expect her to endure the loud cries of a baby in such a shabby place, ignoring her maid's soft pleas to calm down. Sister Agnes bows her head in silent apology, quietly enduring the noble lady's harsh outbursts while Harriet watches the unfair confrontation with a heavy heart. In the safety of their room, the sweet children sleep peacefully huddled together under a thick, warm blanket, completely oblivious to the drama in the hallway. Sister Emma cheerfully tells them that her clothes got quite dirty and that she is going to change, urging the two of them to go ahead and rest first. Sister Agnes looks on in silence, her expression filled with a quiet, complex mix of worry and deep thought. Agnes tells Harriet with a trace of bitterness that she wouldn't understand their struggles since she is fortunate enough to have a wealthy guardian. To Agnes, Harriet's guardian is a blessing, but in truth, Harriet envisions him as a jailer, keeping her locked inside a cold, chained birdcage. Harriet softly confesses that she sometimes shamelessly wishes she could live a simple, free life without such worries, perhaps even opening her own small shop. Surprised by Harriet's humble and unexpected dream, Agnes quickly turns away, clearing her throat to hide her embarrassment. Harriet gazes at Agnes with her golden green eyes, touched by the sister's sudden, shy reaction. Emma suddenly pops her head into the room, curiously asking what the two of them were talking about that kept them there for so long. Agnes defensively denies talking about anything, prompting Emma to playfully tease her, calling her a liar with a bright laugh. Left alone in the quiet hallway, Harriet places a hand over her heart, reflecting deeply on her dreams and the future of the convent. The elder priest delivers shocking news to Harriet, stating that John Listerwell is officially terminating his guardianship over her. Harriet stares blankly in utter shock, her green eyes wide with disbelief as the heavy words sink in. He repeats the life-altering announcement, confirming that John Listerwell has indeed terminated her guardianship. Stunned into silence, Harriet can only stare forward as her entire world shifts in an instant. In a grand sunlit parlor, an elderly gentleman sits on a plush sofa, coughing softly as he prepares to speak with Harriet face to face. The elegant, gray-haired gentleman looks warmly at Harriet and introduces himself, saying, "I am Baron Alfonso Villay. Rumors are spreading that Viscount Listerwell couldn't tolerate your behavior any longer and cut off your guardianship." An older gentleman stands silently in the foreground, looking out over a grand, arched ballroom where a small group of nobles is gathered. Amidst the whispering crowd, a young noble lady covers her face in distress as she is comforted by those surrounding her. Sitting on the sofa opposite Harriet, the elderly gentleman says, "I too witnessed that situation firsthand." Looking down thoughtfully, he adds, "Seeing that brought back my suspicions from 9 years ago." He looks directly at Harriet, saying, "I'm sure you remember that day, Lady Harriet." In a flashback, a young Harriet stands happily with a beautiful daisy crown on her head, looking up at two adults in a sunlit field. The young Harriet smiles brightly as a hand gently rests on her head, her golden green eyes shining with joy as she asks, "Really?" She watches happily as her parents walk away hand in hand through a beautiful sunlit field of daisies. Back in the present, Harriet sits with her head bowed, her hands tightly gripping her skirt as she listens to the painful memories. The gentleman looks at her with a gentle, sincere expression, waiting for her to process the truth. He leans forward slightly, preparing to reveal a dark secret from the past. In a memory, a lantern hangs from a sinking boat in a stormy lake, with a voice crying out, "Water is leaking into the boat! Help!" Another boat rows away in the distance as a man on the shore watches in horror, shouting, "John, don't go!" A hand reaches out desperately from the dark water as the voice begs, "At least save Lillian! Please save my wife!" While the narrator notes, "John Listerwell and his wife." The light of the lantern sinks beneath the waves as the narration continues, turned a blind eye to their cries for help. Harriet's eyes widen in sheer shock as the terrible truth of her parents' tragic death is revealed to her. Clenching the fabric of her skirt, she thinks to herself, "My uncle was the first one to call for help to save my parents." Looking at the gentleman in disbelief, she asks, "If that were true, why would he take me in?" In a flashback, her uncle stands under an umbrella at a funeral, looking solemn as he comforts the young Harriet while she reflects, "And anyone would have thought he was a good man." The gentleman speaks firmly, insisting, "What I saw wasn't a mistake." He continues, "I believe he used that boating accident as an opportunity to take over the family. Now, without a will from the previous Viscount." A spiderweb frames a high view of the quiet room where they sit. As the narration continues, "Cutting off your guardianship and forcing you to remain a nun at the convent? That would be the easiest way to completely seize the family's assets." Harriet sits in stunned silence, unable to find the words to speak as the devastating reality sinks in. The gentleman pushes a small box across the table, saying, "It isn't much, but please accept this as an apology for my years of cowardice." She looks away with a heavy heart, replying, "I appreciate you telling me the truth, but I cannot accept money given at the cost of my parents' lives." Standing up to leave, she bows her head and says, "I apologize. I will take my leave now." Harriet runs out into the grand stone corridor of the convent, her heavy, panicked breathing echoing through the empty arches as she thinks, "No, She stops and leans against a stone pillar, gasping for breath as she tries to process the overwhelming shock and grief. In a flashback, her uncle stands tall and cold alongside his family, as the text reveals, is not the Baron. He looks down with a cold, unfeeling expression, saying, "They say holding on to the belongings of the dead causes their souls to suffer." He watches as a young Harriet is forced to look at her parents' belongings being consumed by a roaring fire, adding, "This is all so your parents can rest in peace." Harriet's eyes reflect the bright, cruel flames as tears stream down her face. She reflects bitterly on the betrayal, realizing, "He burned my parents' belongings and ruined my reputation. Yet I endured it all, thinking I owed him a debt for taking me in." But a close-up shows her eyes narrowing with a sudden, intense fury. She walks out of the corridor and towards a statue of a saint bathing in the warm sunlight of the courtyard. Her hands clench into tight fists by her side as she stands before the statue. She remembers a happy family portrait of her parents and herself when they were still alive and whole. Her younger self smiles with pure, untainted happiness, oblivious to the tragedy that awaited her. She looks at a shattered mirror reflecting her childhood self next to her uncle's smiling family, thinking, "After stealing everything from me?" The reflection shows her cousin and her uncle smiling warmly together as she wonders in anguish, how could he? Her cousin turns her head with a mockingly sweet, calculating smile as Harriet asks, "Live his life smiling right to my face?" In the quiet courtyard, Harriet falls to her knees before the statue, her body trembling with grief. Clasping her hands tightly, she thinks, "I simply cannot forgive them." Tears pour from her green eyes as she weeps, her heart breaking from the weight of the betrayal. She remembers the faces of those who ruined her life, thinking of them as those who took everything from me. Looking up at the statue with a fierce determination, she declares, "I will never forgive them." Dark, malicious eyes peer out from the shadows over the whispering faces of noble ladies. In the dark, the words, "the scandal maker," appear over the gossip-filled high society that cast her out. Standing before the altar, Harriet clasps her hands tightly and vows, "If that's how they want to use me, I'll become a true scandal maker," Harriet vows with tears streaming down her face and a look of absolute determination in her golden green eyes as she clasps her hands in prayer. In the quiet, dimly lit stone corridor of the convent, Sister Agnes and another nun walk down the wooden hallway under the warm glow of hanging chandeliers. Standing by a window inside, the young blonde nun looks out into the cold, windy night as dried leaves scrape against the glass. "Still working this late?" Sister Agnes says softly as she joins the blonde sister, wrapping a warm, hand-knit shawl around her shoulders. In a brightly lit stone hallway, Sister Harriet stands quietly with her hands clasped, speaking with an older, gray-haired gentleman. Sister Agnes gasps in surprise when she spots Harriet walking in the chilly hallway, calling out, "Sister Harriet, it's freezing out and you're dressed so lightly." Agnes quickly walks up to Harriet and gently wraps the warm shawl around her, worriedly saying, "Your hands are like ice. You'll be in big trouble if you catch a cold." The blonde nun stands silently in the background, keeping a watchful and serious eye on Harriet. Harriet quietly accepts the warm knitted shawl, her hand gently touching the fabric as she gathers it around her. Changing the subject, the blonde nun looks intently at Harriet and says, "More importantly," looking back at them with a solemn, resolute expression, Harriet calmly says, "I'd like to mail a letter." Surprised but eager to help, Sister Agnes bows politely and replies, I'll bring you an envelope tomorrow morning," to which Harriet softly replies, "Thank you, Sister Agnes." Harriet turns and walks away down the dark hallway, her footsteps echoing as the two sisters watch her go. Looking at Harriet's retreating figure, the blonde nun turns to Agnes and says quietly, "I agree." An overhead view shows Harriet walking alone down the long, shadowed wooden corridor as Agnes and the blonde sister stand far behind. In a grand parlor bathed in warm golden light, a handsome blonde nobleman sits on a leather sofa, holding a red gemstone necklace in his hand. On a decorative table, a handwritten letter lies open, reading, "Grant me your time once more. It is only right to celebrate the House of Kailas' victory with our vassals. From your dear uncle, Benedict." Standing up and looking at the red pendant, the blonde gentleman thinks bitterly, if they only knew that the wine of victory was pressed from someone's blood and tears, they wouldn't be able to drink it so joyfully. A dark, dramatic scene depicts a fortified cliffside castle under a stormy sky as the narration reveals that the nobles shirked their duties during the Firma Kingdom War. In a flashback, a nobleman on horseback approaches a royal lady and her entourage, while Cedric reflects, "Back then, my father, for the sake of the imperial family? No." A close-up shows the beautiful, blue-eyed royal woman wearing a ruby crown, her expression filled with profound worry and grief. In a rainy, blood-stained battlefield, a young Cedric cradles a dying comrade in his arms, crying out, "There's no reason for the supply lines to be cut. This is clearly my uncle's doing." The dying companion looks up at Cedric with a bloody, peaceful smile, saying, "I'm just glad that you at least made it out alive. Can I?" Cedric's eyes fill with tears as his dying friend continues, "I wanted to treat her so much better once I returned." Clasping the red ruby pendant, the friend whispers his final words, "Don't resent your mother too much. It's only because I was so clumsy." A close-up shows the stunning ruby pendant resting in Cedric's hand as a painful reminder of his friend's sacrifice. Back in the present, Cedric sits on the sofa looking up at his father's portrait, thinking, "Father, you're always the one who loses out. If that's what love is, then I..." A shadowed silhouette is visible through the frosted glass doors of Cedric's private library. Turning slightly from his sofa, Cedric calls out towards the door, "Come in." A cheerful young man with glasses and messy light brown hair enters with a big laugh and a wine glass, introduced as Edgar Dawson, Cedric's longtime friend. Edgar playfully asks, "Should I call you your Grace then?" as he shakes hands with a stoic Cedric, who flatly replies, "Don't bother." Edgar sits down on the sofa opposite Cedric and brings up business, saying, "Oh, and about that thing you asked for." Cedric pours a glass of red wine for his friend, responding, "I looked into it and you were right." Behind a banner of the Firma Kingdom showing a cobra, a shadowy figure whispers to another, as Edgar reveals, "Your uncle, Benedict Kingsley, he was in league with the Firma Kingdom." Sitting on the sofa, Cedric hands the wine glass to Edgar and says firmly, "Whatever time it takes, I'm counting on you." Cedric's crimson eyes gleam with a cold, unforgiving determination as he thinks, "The ruin of those who dared conspire in my father's death must be prepared slowly and with absolute certainty." Edgar relaxes on the sofa, holding up his glass with a casual, light-hearted smile. Suddenly, Edgar pauses mid-sentence, his eyes dropping to the table in front of him. Edgar sips his wine and notes thoughtfully, "It figures she was already notorious for being a scandal maker." Cedric's hand twitches as his fingers clench tightly, a subtle reaction that doesn't escape Edgar's sharp notice. "And after causing a mess like that, well, oops, I guess I touched a nerve," Edgar teases with a laugh before asking, "Anyway, where are you planning to donate for the upcoming Holy Feast?" Looking down at the letter resting on the table next to his wine glass, Edgar gasps in surprise, asking, "Huh?" Cedric sits back calmly, staring intensely at Edgar with his piercing red eyes. A portrait shows a beautiful young woman with dark hair, a black lace choker, and striking golden green eyes looking forward with a serious and dignified expression. A dramatic close-up of Cedric's sharp red eyes shows his unwavering focus and intense resolve. The scene shifts to the exterior of the grand stone church and convent complex, standing quiet under a clear winter sky. In the courtyard, the Mother Superior speaks with Cedric, saying, "Thank you, Duke," to which he replies, "Don't mention it. The nursing staff you sent during the war was an immense help." Cedric stands tall in his dark coat, looking respectfully at the Mother Superior under the stone arches. The camera angles up towards a large stone statue of a saint overlooking the courtyard as the nun says softly, "The previous Duke will surely find eternal peace in the arms of Yahweh." Cedric closes his eyes and gives a quiet, respectful nod in agreement. The Duke agrees with the Mother Superior, saying, "I would be glad to," as they walk down the stone hallway together. The Mother Superior explains that they plan to use his donation to finally finish the repairs on the workshop. She gestures towards a stone building across the courtyard, explaining, "This is where the soap is made, but..." Cedric looks on with an intense, curious expression as his eyes catch someone working inside. Inside the workshop, Harriet works tirelessly, sweating as she stirs a large boiling vat of soap with a wooden paddle. The Mother Superior turns back, noticing his attention lingering on the workshop. As Harriet turns around, Cedric asks from the doorway, "Would it be possible for me to meet with Lady Listerwell?" Sitting across from Harriet in a quiet parlor, Cedric begins the conversation, saying, "I heard you were looking for me." Staring calmly across the table, Cedric asks her, "What news?" Harriet remains silent for a moment, carefully gathering her thoughts. Cedric watches her closely, waiting for her to speak. Harriet takes a sip of tea, suddenly remembering a crucial detail. She remembers his intense gaze and how he had told her that the brooch was his father's precious keepsake. Remembering how her own parents' belongings were consumed by flames, she realizes how devastated he must have been to lose his last memory of his father. Harriet's hand trembles slightly as she sets down her teacup when Cedric remarks, "You seem to have adjusted well to life here." Cedric notes that he saw her working with bare hands in the freezing cold, to which she quietly replies, "Oh, I didn't have time to pack any winter things." A brief silence fills the dimly lit room as they sit opposite each other on the plush sofas. Leaning forward, Cedric offers, "If you wish to become a nun, I will cover your tuition and living expenses." Harriet stares at him in surprise, caught off guard by his sudden generosity. He adds that his offer covers everything, saying that includes what happened at the victory banquet. Harriet lowers her head, feeling the weight of her notorious reputation. Looking back up at him, Harriet asks softly, "Is that all you're worried about?" She questions his true intentions, asking that I might go around bad-mouthing you? A faint, amused smile plays on Cedric's lips as he listens to her question. With a calm and resolute expression, Harriet declines, saying, "I appreciate the offer, but I must decline." Cedric's expression hardens slightly, surprised by her sudden refusal. Harriet sits up tall and firmly declares, "And I'm going back to Genoa." Harriet continues, resolved to face her future, saying, "I'll manage with what I have." Cedric warns her, "Letting your pride get in the way isn't a wise choice right now." Harriet looks down, admitting bitterly, "And this is where it got me." She looks up, her eyes flashing with a sudden, fierce determination. Cedric locks eyes with her, captivated by her unwavering resolve. He shifts his position slightly, folding his gloved hands together. Standing up, Cedric looks down at her with a commanding presence. Without another word, he turns and begins to walk out of the parlor. Harriet lets out a long sigh as she sits alone in the quiet, empty room. Harriet laments, "I feel like I just let a huge stroke of luck slip away, but this is for the best. I don't want to look like I'm begging." The warm tea sits untouched on the table as the steam slowly dissipates. Harriet stares blankly ahead, lost in her own deep thoughts. Looking through the window, she ponders, the rumors Bella spread must have reached every corner of high society. A letter is tossed into the fireplace, its edges curling as the flames consume it. An older woman reads a letter, thinking to herself, "She wants me to be her guardian." The distinguished older lady with a monocle and styled gray hair smiles intriguingly as she holds the letter. Her butler hands her a stack of papers in the grand room, and she responds, "Indeed." The butler looks at her with a curious and questioning expression. Writing with a decorative quill, she muses aloud, "A scandal maker, is she?" She remembers the past, reflecting, "I haven't paid them any mind since Arthur died and we cut ties," but the lady reaches down to open a drawer in her mahogany desk. The sound of the quill scratching against the parchment echoes in the quiet room as she continues writing. She continues writing the gossip she heard, writing, "They say she's so desperate for men that she's disgraced her family name countless times. Even her uncle has supposedly turned his back on her." Handing over a sealed letter, the distinguished countess with styled gray hair instructs her stern subordinate, "I want you to go and educate that girl." Roxana, dressed in a high-collared dark coat, takes the letter with a quiet, respectful focus under her lady's commanding gaze. The countess carefully adjusts her spectacles, her piercing blue eyes gleaming with sharp intent. Looking out across her grand room, the countess's cold expression remains entirely unbothered and resolute. Harriet, dressed in a plain black novice dress at the convent, looks up in surprise as her bedroom doors suddenly opened. Standing tall and commanding in her dark attire, Roxana introduces herself by saying, "I will be instructing you for the next 5 months, Lady Harriet." Peering from behind the heavy wooden door, 2 young novice nuns whisper in fear, "She's scary," to which the other replies, "That's because you're spying on her." Roxana's gaze sharpens intensely as she declares, "I have no intention of going easy on anyone who might disgrace the Countess's name." Unfazed by the daunting challenge ahead, Harriet looks up with a fierce resolve and responds, "I'll give it my all." Harriet's rigorous training begins immediately as she practices her posture under Roxana's strict supervision, who warns, "Don't let the book fall, keep your balance." As the winter snow blankets the convent, Harriet works diligently alongside the other sisters, one of whom happily tells her, "I heard Duke Kailas sent some winter supplies." Wrapped in a warm winter scarf and coat, Harriet walks through the quiet arches of the courtyard, blushing as she reflects, "There's no way a man like him would care about this." Meanwhile, through the grand gold-trimmed glass doors of a bustling ballroom, couples dance elegantly as a voice remarks, "Lord Albert is quite impressive." Albert, dressed in an exquisite patterned suit, dances with a beautiful golden-haired woman who giggles softly in his embrace. He pulls her closer, his eyes locked onto hers as they sway seamlessly to the music. Leaning down, Albert presses a soft kiss to her forehead, causing her to smile warmly and close her eyes. Her green eyes flutter open as her gentle smile shifts into a subtle, knowing smirk while she thinks to herself, "Honestly." They glide effortlessly across the dance floor, completely captivating the attention of the surrounding high society guests. Back at the convent, the young nuns wave a tearful goodbye as Harriet's carriage rattles down the path lined with blooming purple lavender. Inside the carriage, Harriet reads a strict letter of warning that advises, don't be satisfied with just keeping up with Roxana's. You've only just built the foundation. Harriet clenches the letter in her lap, staring ahead anxiously as she mentally prepares for the challenges waiting at her destination. Suddenly, the carriage driver calls out, Genoa Castle is just ahead. Everyone, halt your carriages. Harriet peers through the glass window, watching the magnificent spires of Genoa Castle loom closer in the reflection. Her eyes shine with an absolute, unwavering resolve as she declares, so that I can take back everything that was stolen from me, one by one. The carriage comes to a halt before the main entrance of Genoa Castle, a magnificent, sprawling palace surrounded by pristine gardens and white roses. Dressed in a formal dark dress, Harriet sits across from the Countess in a grand drawing room as the older lady sips her tea and remarks, I sent Roxana because it seemed John failed to educate you properly. The Countess elegantly sips from her porcelain cup, completely unbothered by her niece's quiet presence. Harriet sits perfectly upright on the plush crimson sofa, calmly listening to her guardian's words. Placing her tea down, the Countess looks at her with a commanding gaze and says, You will continue to receive Roxana's guidance. She dismisses Harriet's attempts at gratitude, stating flatly, The gratitude in your letter was enough. Looking directly at her niece, the Countess warns, Overdoing it only diminishes your value. Harriet's mind wanders back 15 years to a childhood memory, remembering how she was strictly scolded, Harriet, looking at me like that is disrespectful. In the flashback, the young Countess had turned her back on her, cold and distant, stating, to a noble, pity is nothing less than an insult. Snapping back to the present, Harriet hides her inner turmoil behind a calm, respectful facade. A formal portrait of the Countess appears as the narration highlights her formidable status, noting she was the first female count in the empire. Harriet lowers her head slightly, keeping her thoughts hidden as she tells herself, I can't be a burden to her. From an overhead view of the sunlit drawing room, the Countess brings up the main issue, stating, It's about those rumors in high society. Harriet looks up calmly, prepared to face the subject she knew was bound to arise. A bead of sweat trickles down Harriet's cheek, her green eyes reflecting her inner tension despite her composed posture. The two women sit in silence across a grand marble table, the atmosphere growing increasingly heavy. The Countess smiles subtly, studying Harriet's reaction with absolute composure. Harriet remains composed and silent under her aunt's critical, assessing gaze. Beneath the table, Harriet tightly clenches her hands in her lap, her knuckles turning white from the stress. Harriet knows she must speak with absolute conviction, thinking, without trust, anything I say would just sound like a one-sided excuse. Looking the Countess dead in the eye, Harriet prepares to defend herself and state her case. The Countess leans back slightly, waiting patiently for Harriet to deliver her response. A close-up shows the Countess's profile, her sharp gaze analytical as she analyzes the young woman sitting before her. Standing up gracefully from her seat, the Countess smooths down her elegant gray gown. Looking down at Harriet with a dry, amused expression, the Countess remarks, Right now, you look more like a monk than a noble lady. Harriet is caught off guard, a warm smile breaking across her face as she softly chuckles, repeating, A monk? Harriet looks around the grand corridor with a mixture of apprehension and quiet determination. Looking down from above, the Countess tells her butler, I'll go out soon and have some dresses and shoes made. The Countess glances back with a sharp, calculating look on her face. Harriet looks up, her bright green eyes filled with sudden surprise. The butler opens the large, ornate double doors as the Countess leads the way inside. The doors swing wide open as the Countess continues speaking, saying, But since I have become your sponsor. Harriet steps into the incredibly grand gold-accented dressing room alongside her aunt. The spacious room is decorated with luxurious damask sofas and sparkling accents. Harriet stands in the center of the beautiful room, her heart beating with anticipation. She follows closely behind the Countess, feeling the heavy responsibility of her new role. Gently running her hand along the back of an elegant armchair, Harriet prepares herself for what is to come. A soft, knowing smile plays on Harriet's lips as she looks ahead with confidence. She watches as the Countess walks over to a large vanity mirror. Walking gracefully across the polished wooden floor, Harriet prepares to sit down at the vanity. Sitting down in front of the mirror, Harriet asks in surprise, next week? The Countess raises her finger with a subtle smile, signaling the waiting servants. Harriet gasps softly as the doors are pushed open, revealing several maids carrying racks of beautiful dresses and accessories. The maids work quickly and efficiently, arranging elegant gowns and placing cosmetic bottles onto the vanity. A maid carefully brushes Harriet's hair while another applies soft blush to her cheeks. Through the large glass windows of the dressing room, the maids depart, leaving Harriet sitting elegantly in her new attire. A gentle, encouraging hand is placed onto Harriet's shoulder. A memory of her childhood flashes back as her aunt's cold voice echoes, "To a noble, pity is nothing less than an insult." In the present, the Countess stands behind her, offering silent support as Harriet stares resolutely into the mirror. A hand reaches down to select a lipstick from the elegant display. The fingers slide over the different shades of pink before selecting a bold, striking red. Harriet carefully applies the vibrant red lipstick to her lips, thinking to herself, "I must learn to mask my scars." Inside the grand, brightly lit palace ballroom, high society guests gather under the massive crystal chandeliers. Noble couples mingle and chat elegantly near the towering arched windows. Cedric stands amidst the crowd, holding a glass of champagne as he speaks with the Countess. His piercing red eyes scan the room as he maintains a polite and sophisticated demeanor. Sipping her tea, the Countess smiles warmly and asks, "What brings you here today?" Cedric looks at her, holding his glass as he replies, "Your great niece?" With a serious expression, Cedric speaks her name, Harriet Listerwell. His gaze sharpens as his intense red eyes reflect his deep interest in her. He speaks in a metaphorical tone, stating, "I saw a fine flower tree withering under the wrong owner." The two stand beside a beautiful flowering plant as Cedric shares his observations. The Countess chuckles softly and responds, "If it wilts completely, all your effort will be for naught. You've never tried gardening, have you?" Smiling, she continues to challenge his perspective as guests laugh and talk nearby, saying, "Just because a tree they're raising begins to wither." She glances back at Cedric, her blue eyes filled with silent amusement. A subtle, satisfied smile spreads across the Countess's face. Suddenly, the grand doors of the ballroom begin to open, catching Cedric's attention as a whisper echoes, "House felons." The announcer's voice booms across the hall, announcing as Harriet appears looking absolutely breathtaking in her deep green gown. She steps forward in elegant ribbon-tied cream heels decorated with delicate gold chains. Harriet walks into the ballroom with immense grace, instantly drawing every eye in the room toward her. Bella's eyes widen in sheer shock and fury as she stares at Harriet's stunning transformation. A male guest whispers in absolute disgust, "What is that vile woman doing here after everything she did to Bella?" Unbothered by the whispers, Harriet walks confidently across the ballroom straight toward Cedric. She smiles serenely, holding her flowing green dress as she stands before the crowd. Bowing politely, Harriet greets Cedric, who watches her with a mixture of admiration and intrigue. The Countess proudly introduces her to a fellow noblewoman, saying, "Thank you for the invite. This is my great niece, Harriet." Harriet bows politely, her hand on her chest, as she greets the surrounding guests in her elegant green dress. Harriet looks stunning in her off-the-shoulder dark green gown as Cedric, standing nearby with a champagne glass, watches her with great interest while she thinks, "Is my outfit too much today?" A man in a dark, structured coat holding a white cloth in his hands flatly instructs, "Do not mention my name anywhere." Harriet smiles subtly with her eyes closed, sweating slightly as she nervously thinks to herself, "He's worried I might say something about him." Harriet stands next to a woman in a blue gown, looking slightly surprised as she glances toward her. Harriet offers a bright, warm smile, her eyes closed in a serene expression as she greets those around her. In the grand, softly lit ballroom, the woman in blue chuckles warmly, exclaiming, "Oh my," while Cedric looks on with a calm, composed expression. Cedric looks up, a subtle blush dusting his cheeks as a guest remarks, "Goodness, you're making me blush." Harriet gracefully converses with the noblewoman and another older lady in the brightly lit ballroom. Bowing respectfully to the guests, Harriet continues her polite introductions as Cedric remains standing behind them, quietly observing. Harriet glances sideways with a contemplative and sharp look in her bright green eyes. Cedric stands with his champagne glass, his deep red eyes fixed on Harriet with a calm, studying gaze. Walking alongside the Countess, Harriet glances back as she politely responds, "Yes, great aunt," while wondering to herself. Looking down at the sunlit staircase of the grand hall, Harriet reflects on her aunt's demeanor, thinking, "She was so sharp at the convent, but she seems different here." The ambient laughter and voices of the high society guests echo through the grand sunlit corridor of the palace. An older gentleman with a mustache and a tan coat gestures warmly as he welcomes the Countess and Harriet. Turning to walk away with her great aunt, Harriet politely says, "Yes, great aunt," leaving the gentleman looking surprised. As they walk through the beautifully decorated palace corridors, the Countess remarks, "Harriet, more people seem to know you than I expected." Harriet's smile falters slightly as she recalls the cruel whispers of the high society ladies holding their fans, saying, "Oh, is she that Listerwell girl? You knew her well." Another memory flashes of noble couples whispering mockingly in the shadows, asking, "Didn't they say she was sent to a convent? What is she doing here?" She remembers the harsh judgment from the ladies of high society, with one whispering behind her hand, "I'm surprised the Countess is sponsoring her." Harriet's thoughts drift as she realizes the heavy burden of her past reputation, thinking, "It'll take time to shed my image as a man-crazy scandal maker." Walking down the grand palace stairs behind the Countess, Harriet remains quiet and composed. The Countess suddenly adjusts her elegant purple hat as Harriet looks up at her with curiosity. Leading the way, the Countess advises her, "Even if it's negative, the fact that so many people know you can be an asset if you use it correctly." Harriet stares ahead with a serious, thoughtful expression, her green eyes reflecting her deep contemplation of her aunt's words. The camera angles down to show Harriet's elegant, cream-colored heels, beautifully adorned with delicate white ruffles and gold chains as she walks forward. Resolving to use her notorious reputation to her advantage, Harriet thinks, "If the infamy Bella gave me is my only card, I must keep people talking." Suddenly, a red-haired woman in a dark blue gown confronts Harriet, coldly saying, "It's been a long time, Harriet." The woman smirks mockingly as she asks, "It's been a year. What have you been up to?" While Harriet maintains a calm, unbothered expression. Behind the red-haired woman, a blonde lady stands with a haughty, superior smile, looking down on Harriet. With an angry expression, the red-haired woman raises her voice, demanding, "Ha! The nerve of you! Do you know how much Bella suffered because you disgraced the family name?" She turns her back to Harriet, continuing her harsh lecture. "If you were truly repentant, you should have stayed hidden." A flashback shows the red-haired woman and her friend cruelly gossiping about Harriet, mocking, "Harriet, as a mere charity case, shouldn't you avoid being such a nuisance?" While another defends, "Stop it, Caroline. Harriet was probably just lonely." And another retorts, "Bella, it's because you're too kind that she acts out like this." Standing tall in her beautiful green gown, Harriet remains calm and unruffled despite the insults thrown her way. The blonde woman gasps in shock as Harriet calmly delivers a sharp counterattack. Lady Laurel and Lord Kingsley were already over. Harriet smiles sweetly, completely unfazed as she addresses the red-haired woman, who trembles in anger. "You must have misunderstood. I just meant she seems to have found a good partner." Harriet gracefully curtsies before them, her demeanor radiating confidence as she easily dismisses their attempts to humiliate her. Turning on her heel, Harriet walks away with a confident stride, leaving the two ladies fuming with shock and asking themselves, "Really the Harriet we know?" Harriet steps out onto a beautiful, spacious stone balcony overlooking the quiet, dark palace gardens to catch her breath. Leaning against the stone balustrade, Harriet stands quietly under the moonlight, while a small squirrel watches her from the edge of the railing. Staring out into the starry night sky, Harriet takes a deep breath and sighs, "Well, it was bound to happen eventually." Suddenly, a man's voice calls out from behind, "I didn't expect to see you in high society again. I'd heard you were back, Harriet Listerwell." Harriet turns around in surprise, asking, "Who are you?" as a young man with blonde hair and a tan coat stumbles drunkenly toward her on the balcony. The young man, his face flushed red from alcohol, hiccups loudly as he holds a glass in his hand. Harriet remembers him from her past. He's the young lord Bella first asked for help with. In her memory, Bella had claimed she couldn't marry a mere viscount's son, forcing Harriet to step in and apologize to him herself. Gritting his teeth in fury, the drunken young man glares at her and snarls, "You're as tactless as ever. How could you forget me after the way you trampled my feelings for Bella?" Noticing how heavily he reeks of alcohol, Harriet realizes she is in danger and thinks, "He reeks of alcohol. This is dangerous. I need to leave." But suddenly he grabs her arm tightly as he yells, "I've been holding back for 3 years." He violently shakes and pulls her, shouting angrily, "But I won't stand for you getting on my nerves like this today," while Harriet gasps in pain. Harriet desperately struggles to break free, crying out, "Let go of me," as the drunken young man aggressively raises his glass, looming over her threateningly. A gloved hand suddenly reaches out and firmly grabs the arm of the drunken young lord, stopping him in his tracks as the sound of a sharp grip echoes. Cedric stands tall and composed under the night sky, his gloved hand effortlessly holding back the startled drunken noble, while Harriet looks back in relief. Looking down at the drunken man with his sharp red eyes, Cedric asks coldly, "Is there a problem?" Harriet turns to look at Cedric, her green eyes filled with a mixture of shock and awe at his sudden intervention. The drunken noble quickly stammers in fear, "Oh no, your grace, I was just so glad to see her again that I got a bit loud," before frantically running away from the balcony. A tense silence returns to the balcony as the drunken man escapes, leaving Cedric standing in the cool night air. Cedric calmly turns back and looks at Harriet, simply stating, "He's gone." Harriet bows deeply to show her gratitude, placing her hand gently on her chest to thank him for his timely help. Cedric's gaze softens slightly as he watches her polite bow, his red eyes reflecting a deep, unreadable curiosity. Harriet steals a quick, nervous glance at Cedric, wondering what he must be thinking after witnessing such an embarrassing encounter. Surrounded by lush greenery, the two stand quietly together on the spacious balcony under the soft moonlight. Harriet's gaze drifts downward, her mind racing as she tries to find the right words to break the silence. Breaking the quiet, Cedric comments with a calm smile, "They say a stay at St. Clarissa Convent can truly change a person." Cedric's expression warms into a subtle, charming smile that contrasts with his usual cold demeanor. Harriet walks a few steps away, repeating his words in her mind. "I suppose the rumors were true. They say a stay at St. Clarissa Convent can truly change a person." She stares ahead into the dark, her expression turning somber as his words touch a sensitive nerve regarding her past. Harriet recalls the past, thinking to herself, he could mean the last banquet. Harriet remembers her quiet days at the convent, thinking, or perhaps our encounter at the monastery. She glances back at the Grand Duke, realizing how little he actually knows of her struggles. Her thoughts drift into sadness as she realizes he doesn't actually know the real me. Harriet turns back to face him fully, declaring firmly, "To be precise, your grace doesn't know anything about me at all." She stands tall, her green eyes fixed on Cedric as she prepares to draw a clear line between them. Harriet contemplates Cedric's high status, thinking, especially since he's a man who, she remembers his cold and distant reputation, thinking, would hate to be involved with me. Harriet glances toward the glowing ballroom windows, knowing they belong to entirely different worlds. She offers a final, respectful bow, choosing to end the conversation before it goes any further. Harriet turns on her heel and walks back inside, leaving Cedric standing solitary under the night sky. A faint, amused smile spreads across Cedric's face as he watches her departure, deeply intrigued by her defiance. Standing alone on the balcony, Cedric thinks to himself, "Everyone here knows you've returned to the earldom." He gazes out into the starry darkness, fully aware of the whispers and schemes surrounding Harriet's sudden return. The Countess smiles confidently in Cedric's memory, saying, "Just you wait, I've never touched a venture that failed." Cedric smirks slightly, thinking back to the Countess's words and agreeing, "I suppose that's true." As she walks through the quiet corridors of the palace, Harriet sighs to herself, "He's always so hard to read." Suddenly, an ominous hand reaches out toward Harriet from the shadows of the corridor. A rough hand grabs her shoulder from behind as a voice shouts, "Harriet!" Harriet is violently spun around to face her uncle, who glares at her with a furious and manic expression. Harriet gasps in shock, crying out, "Uncle!" as he shakes her and threatens, "If you dare try to tarnish Bella's reputation, I'll make you regret it." He screams in her face, "No one will believe you anyway." Her uncle sneers maliciously, adding, "Not unless your dead parents came back to life." He grips her shoulders tightly, trying to intimidate her into silence in the empty, dimly lit corridor. Gritting his teeth, her uncle continues, however, Harriet cuts him off calmly, saying, "You know the truth, uncle." Looking straight into his eyes, she declares that I'm not the real scandal maker. Harriet recalls her childhood, accusing him, "Every time Bella caused trouble, you asked me to help her." She remembers how Bella would always play the victim, crying tearfully to get Harriet blamed for her own misdeeds. He thinks of the past when she was completely alone, thinking, "Knowing you were the only person I had to rely on." Looking at his pale, sweating face, Harriet says bitterly, "You were so cruel, mocking my desperate trust in you." With a swift, decisive motion, Harriet slaps her uncle's hands off her shoulders, refusing to be handled by him any longer. Trembling with rage and shock at her defiance, her uncle thinks she should have backed down by now. As whispered laughter echoes from the nearby party hall, the two stand locked in a tense standoff in the palace corridor. Harriet worries to herself that if she is seen arguing, the prestigious image she worked so hard to build today will completely crumble. Putting on a sweet and serene smile, Harriet tells her uncle, "Well then, uncle, if you have nothing more to say, I'll be going." Leaving her uncle standing on the steps in stunned silence, Harriet turns around and walks away with graceful strides. As a carriage door shuts loudly, her uncle is left standing completely alone on the empty balcony of the Grand Palace. In a fit of mad laughter, her uncle sneers, "Ha!" as his face twists with furious rage. He screams in sheer anger and frustration inside his mind, cursing, "That Harriet!" Sitting quietly in the dimly lit carriage, Harriet closes her eyes and takes a deep breath to calm her racing mind. She tightly clasps her trembling hands together, thinking to herself, I thought I'd be okay, but I'm still scared. Looking out the window at the quiet night, she continues to reflect. But if I were still my uncle's ward, could I have ever imagined a moment like this? Staring out at the dark trees under the moonlight, she realizes, I don't have to beg for forgiveness while he yells at me. As the carriage carries her away from the grand palace, her mind remains focused on her newfound freedom, thinking that Looking at her reflection in the window, she feels a sense of quiet determination growing within her. Harriet's gaze softens as she looks out, ready to face whatever challenges lie ahead of her. Sitting tall and poised, Harriet prepares herself to truly step into her new life. Letters and documents are laid out on a table, including invitations addressed not just as my great-aunt's ward, to Countess Trista Felon and her ward. She looks over invitations addressed to Lady Harriet Listerwell, ward of Countess Felon, and simply to Lady Harriet, reminding herself, I must establish my own standing as Harriet Listerwell. Another beautiful invitation adorned with eucalyptus leaves is addressed directly to Lady Harriet Listerwell. Now dressed in an elegant light-colored gown with a dark bow, Harriet holds a letter, looking determined to make her own path. At a tea party inside a grand salon, a lady chatting on a sofa declares, I'll definitely make it next time. A cheerful blonde lady holds her cup and smiles as she converses with her friends. Suddenly, another lady looks surprised and asks, Harriet? As she brings up the controversial name. A red-haired lady named Caroline sneers as she says, she was utterly shameless at the Vanderbilt estate too. Sipping her tea, Bella mockingly defends her, saying, Caroline, you know Harriet gets a bit stiff when she's nervous. Bella smiles with a sweet but entirely fake expression, acting as though she is trying to be understanding. Bella looks up with a gentle smirk, saying, but since she's back in society, I hope she adjusts well this time without any misunderstandings. She laughs softly, charm dripping from her words as another lady watches her with sparkling admiration. Looking at the red-haired lady, Bella thinks to herself, at times like this, while a tense silence briefly falls over the table. Behind her teacup, Bella's eyes gleam with a malicious smirk as she thinks toying with her really is the best. Harriet stands in the garden, looking from afar at a group of ladies having a tea party under a beautiful floral arch. With leaves gently framing her face, Harriet watches them calmly, ready to make her move. At the outdoor tea party, one of the ladies sighs, I'm already worried about what dress to wear to the next banquet, while another agrees, I know, it's so exhausting when summer arrives and the big banquets start piling up. A lady in a yellow gown happily chimed in, saying, I totally agree. Beside her, a woman in a green dress and her friend share a sly giggle. Harriet takes a slow, elegant sip of her tea, remaining completely calm and unbothered. The hostess drinks her tea nervously, sweating and groaning to herself. Her eyes widen in sheer panic as she thinks, oh no, Lady Dalton is bringing up. Looking down at the table, she worries, at this rate, Harriet is going to cause another scene. She remembers the scandalous rumors from the banquet a year ago. At the banquet a year ago, she was at the center of everything when the mood turned sour, while whispers asked, wait, did she actually steal that and wear it? She vividly recalls the gossip about Harriet being absolutely boy-crazy, thinking in terror, if she ruins my tea party too? Lady Dalton raises her cup with a laugh, saying, now that you mention it, there was an event like that, wasn't there? While the hostess tries to stop her, crying, Lady Dalton, wait. Everyone's shocked. Harriet bursts into a bright, joyful chuckle, saying, I completely. The other ladies stare at her in absolute disbelief and surprise. Harriet's eyes crinkle with a serene and beautiful smile, completely unfazed by their attempts to embarrass her. Harriet thinks to herself, at the first tea party since my return to society, to bring up this topic can only mean one thing. Looking up at the clear sky through the trees, she realizes this might be the perfect time to clear up the misunderstandings about me. The three ladies sit in stunned silence, waiting to see how Harriet will respond. Harriet cautions herself, thinking, but I shouldn't rush it. A close-up shows her elegant smile as she thinks, this meeting isn't just about clearing my name. Harriet places her hand on her chest and speaks with poise, ready to turn the conversation to her advantage. The red-haired lady and the hostess look completely stunned, with one of them stammering, I see. Harriet sits gracefully at the table, looking across at her companion as a serene breeze rustles through the garden. In her memory, a smiling lady holds up a teacup and politely says, please be understanding if I say something rude. Seen from above, the ladies sit gathered around the elegant table, enjoying their tea party in the sun-drenched courtyard. Harriet bursts into a joyful laugh, her eyes closed in genuine amusement. The blonde lady across from her smiles back warmly, glad to see Harriet in such high spirits. Leaning forward with interest, one of the ladies asks, isn't it about time you told us? Another lady eagerly chimes in, "Oh, come on, we're all dying to know," while Harriet blinks in confusion, wondering, "We're all dying to know," while Harriet blinks in confusion, wondering. Harriet blinks in surprise as the focus of the conversation suddenly shifts entirely to her. Gesturing dramatically, the lady says, "But now it's glowing like a pearl. To be honest, I've been trying everything, but nothing seems to work for me." Harriet listens intently, a thoughtful expression crossing her face as she tells herself to wait. She remembers Sister Agnes pleading, "It would be so encouraging if you all could try it," and wonders, is this my chance to make Sister Agnes's dream come true? The ladies whisper excitedly, saying, "Oh my, what is it? And I can't believe such a thing exists." Harriet smiles with quiet confidence, pleased that her plan is working. The ladies react in mock outrage and curiosity, with one exclaiming, "What?" and another sighing, "You're so mean, I won't be able to sleep a wink tonight." Harriet looks to the side with an analytical gaze, thinking about the rising demand. Standing alone inside a beautifully decorated room, Harriet looks out the window at the peach trees growing outside. Harriet watches the garden with a worried expression, thinking, "I hope my plan doesn't become a burden to the convent." A close-up of Harriet's bright green eyes reveals her deep sense of responsibility and focus. She recalls the hard work of the nuns, remembering, "I really want to help the sisters in any way I can." Turning back toward the room, Harriet ponders, is there a way to promote the soap without overwhelming them? Suddenly, her great-aunt, Countess Felon, enters, and Harriet turns to greet her, saying, "Oh, great-aunt." Her great-aunt walks over to the window as Harriet hesitantly begins, "Well?" Harriet looks a bit anxious as she mentions, "Supply is limited." The Countess gazes out the window, asking firmly, "Have you decided how far you want to spread the word? I cannot give you an answer until I know that." Harriet looks down, contemplating her goals. The more soap we sell, the faster the convent's finances will improve. Harriet speaks up clearly, determined to present a solid plan. Her great-aunt listens with a knowing, proud smile gracing her lips. Looking out at the trees, the Countess asks, "That tree? What do you think was needed for it?" Harriet looks at the ripe peaches hanging from the branch and responds, "The labor of the gardener and yourself, perhaps?" Ripe peaches glisten in the warm, golden sunlight outside the grand window. Countess Felon continues her lesson, soil to nurture that seed, and even the wind to spread it. Only when all those forces combine can you finally see the flowers bloom. She smiles warmly at her grandniece, adding, "We call that investment." Harriet absorbs her great-aunt's wisdom, feeling a renewed sense of direction. Outside, yellow dandelions sway gently in the breeze. Children play happily in front of the grand church of the convent under the blue sky. From an overhead view, Harriet sits across from the Mother Superior in her quiet, book-filled office. Harriet sits poised and elegant, ready to deliver her proposal. The Mother Superior sits calmly, listening with a serene and patient demeanor. Harriet speaks with conviction, saying, "I know the convent's long-held dream is to build a facility to protect and educate abandoned girls." The Mother Superior looks up, surprised by Harriet's deep insight and concern. Pointing to the children playing outside the window, Harriet asks, "They're still here, aren't they?" The Mother Superior nods slowly in agreement, replying, "That is correct." Harriet remembers the young nuns laughing together, reflecting, "Knowing that the things I chose to do, however small." Harriet looks out at the courtyard with a look of deep empathy, thinking, "I don't want any of them to feel like I did before I came here." Looking toward the chapel altar, she continues her thought, thinking that there's no other path for them in life. Harriet speaks with passionate determination, her eyes shining with resolve. The Mother Superior smiles softly, touched by Harriet's kindness and ambition. Harriet extends her hand confidently, declaring, "Sign an exclusive contract with me, Mother Superior." The Mother Superior gazes at Harriet's open hand, deeply considering the bold proposal. The camera pans back to the quiet office as a hopeful new partnership begins to take shape. A sister stands waiting in silence, knocked into suspense as she faces a heavy wooden door. Inside the quiet room, Harriet lets out a soft sigh, trying to calm her racing thoughts. Sitting on the sofa, she stares thoughtfully at the bookshelf, her mind weighed down by the convent's financial troubles. She reminds herself, "We haven't received any financial support since Duke Kailas's donation during the Holy Feast Day." Knowing the dire situation, she ponders her next move with a serious look in her eyes. She worries, "Judging by his attitude so far, he seems to be extremely wary of me." At his grand desk, a man thoughtfully taps his fingers, lost in his own calculations. Duke Kailas sits in his private study, surrounded by stacks of documents and burning candles. He glances down at the red request list for audiences, where Harriet Listerwell's name stands out clearly among the others. Duke narrows his eyes slightly as he ponders her sudden visit. She remembers her bold words to him. To be precise, perhaps you don't know anything about me at all, Your Grace. He looks intrigued yet cautious, thinking to himself, once again, she does the unexpected. She's doing something completely unexpected again, he muses. With a swift, elegant stroke of his pen, Duke Cedric signs his name on the red document. Riding in the carriage, Harriet anxiously presents her red invitation card to the guard outside. The elegant carriage rolls smoothly down the wide, stone-paved driveway of the grand estate. Harriet asks in surprise, does the duchy always inspect visitors like this? They're inspecting every single carriage. The guard politely replies, yes. The guard maintains a professional but friendly smile as he performs his security duties. With a respectful nod, the guard allows her carriage to proceed past the gates. Looking out the window, Harriet thinks, now that I think about it, I heard something similar back at the convent. They said Duke Kailas's carriage was caught in an explosion. She wonders, was the culprit really a boy from Firma? I thought it was just a wild exaggeration back then, but it seems the rumors were entirely true. She wonders with a heavy heart, what must it be like to live every day knowing someone is trying to kill you? He seems so remarkably composed despite living under such constant threat. If it were me, I'd be too terrified to even step outside my room, she admits to herself. The carriage arrives in front of a magnificent palace where water dances gracefully in a massive, multi-tiered fountain. Feeling like a small fish in a massive pond, Harriet can't help but marvel at the sheer scale of the estate. Looking at the towering pillars and the bustling grand lobby, she whispers, truly, he really does live in a completely different world than I do, she realizes, feeling a bit overwhelmed. She stops to admire a stunning portrait of a noble lady hanging on the wall. She is escorted through the palace's high-ceilinged, lavishly decorated corridors. She takes a deep, steadying breath and tells herself there's no reason to be scared. I have a right to be here. She clutches her business proposal tightly against her chest to stop her hands from trembling. Standing before the towering double doors, she steels her resolve, thinking, I have to try my absolute best to convince him. As the massive doors slowly swing open, she repeats, for the sake of the convent. I must make this investment happen no matter what it takes. Inside the room, Duke Cedric sits regally on a plush sofa, his eyes locked onto her as she enters. A pristine quill rests silently in its glass inkwell on the table between them, waiting to seal a deal. He waits patiently, exuding an aura of calm authority that fills the entire room. Harriet nervously recalls their previous encounter, thinking, he knew all along that I wasn't just avoiding the situation, I was avoiding him specifically. Taking her seat, she immediately starts, I sincerely apologize if I've offended you in any way. He lets out a soft, amused smile, his crimson eyes gleaming with interest. Confused by his reaction, she thinks, why is he smiling like that again? No, I absolutely cannot let my guard down. Opening her folder, she gets straight to the point. I am here today to discuss a business opportunity with you. She presents her proposal, saying, I would like to request an initial investment for this business venture from your household. Cedric reaches out slowly to take the documents from her. He silently flips through the pages, reviewing the detailed proposal she put together. Harriet sits in tense silence, her heart pounding frantically against her ribs as she waits for his reaction. The Duke reads on, his handsome face betraying absolutely no emotion as he scans her words. However, he looks up and challenges her, asking, I wonder if a simple monastery product can truly outperform highly specialized beauty brands. Harriet looks at him with confidence and declares, but I can prove its competitiveness. Duke Cedric remains skeptical, counter-arguing, but it's not as if such soaps don't exist already, is it? Smiling with utter certainty, Harriet proudly points to herself, saying, me, Harriet Listerwell. Duke Cedric gazes at her, surprised by her bold and unapologetic self-assurance. He rests his chin on his fingers, a smirk playing on his lips as he says, confident, aren't we? Harriet quickly tries to explain her strategy, saying, what I mean is, to sell a product. She recalls her long days of hard labor, explaining, this isn't just baseless confidence. I've been at the monastery for the past year. My sudden return is surprising enough. Harriet presents herself as living proof, adding, but I've also returned with a clear complexion after suffering from skin issues. She envisions the high society ladies at a tea party, whispering, so. She mimics the curiosity of the noblewomen, asking, how did your skin become so clear? Leaning in, Cedric acknowledges her point, saying, that's what everyone will be curious about. Harriet sits poised as Duke Cedric carefully considers the potential of her clever marketing angle. In the quiet study, Harriet waits anxiously, hoping her pitch was enough to sway the powerful Duke. Cedric stays silent, a subtle, amused smile playing on his lips as he contemplates the proposal. The vast drawing room falls quiet as Cedric takes a moment to process her words. Suddenly, Cedric bursts into quiet laughter, leaving Harriet completely bewildered by his reaction. With a soft tap, Cedric places his finger firmly on her business proposal. Cedric leans forward over the table, ready to deliver his verdict on her venture. Feeling the sudden shift in tension, Harriet tightly grips her folder, bracing herself for his response. Harriet speaks with intense passion, determined to fight for the monastery's survival. She holds her ground, keeping her eyes locked onto the Duke with absolute resolve. Cedric sits back, observing her fierce determination with silent respect. She recalls the humble chapel of the convent, thinking, St. Clarissa doesn't receive many donations. For girls with nowhere to go to find their way, they need a steady source of income. Harriet looks down, her expression softening with empathy for the young girls at the convent. From the outside looking in, the two continue their high-stakes business negotiation in the grand parlor. Duke Cedric listens intently, the gravity of her words reflecting in his crimson eyes. Harriet waits in tense silence, hoping she managed to touch his heart as well as his business mind. Cedric gazes across the table at Harriet, seeing her not just as a noblewoman, but as a capable partner. Harriet's eyes light up with a glimmer of hope as she asks, "Does that mean?" Cedric holds the quill in his hand, a confident and reassuring expression on his face. Harriet looks at him, her cheeks flushing slightly as she realizes the deal might actually go through. In a sudden, comical shift, Harriet is startled by Cedric's rapid calculations. A chibi-style Harriet comically panics about finding the right price point for the soap. She sweats comically, wondering if she should seek out another guild if things fall through. Cedric playfully pokes her cheek with his finger, teasing her as she lets out a startled, "Oh, right." Sliding the document across the marble table, Cedric says, "Take a look." Harriet looks down at the paper, completely stunned by what she is reading. Cedric smiles warmly, pleased with the terms he has laid out for their partnership. Harriet looks to the side, sweating as she wonders why. She signs her name on the contract, declaring, "I have no objections. I'll sign the contract. I'll do my best not to tarnish your honorable name, Duke," while thinking, "I can't let this opportunity slip away." Harriet looks up from the document, her heart pounding with a mixture of excitement and disbelief. She recalls the dark shadows of her past, remembering the whispers, the rumors about me. So this is that Listerwell. She remembers the cruel gossip that followed her, thinking, if people find out it's me, the business might get caught up in unnecessary gossip. Cedric looks down at the completed document, satisfied with the new partnership they have forged. The official contract lies on the table, bearing the elegant signatures of both Cedric and Harriet. Walking down the lavish corridor, Harriet marvels, a seasoned businessman really is on another level. The contract was finished and the business plan finalized in an instant. Clutching the folder to her chest, she smiles warmly, thinking, my very first contract, achieved with my own hands. Harriet opens the heavy double doors, ready to share the wonderful news of her success. Suddenly, her eyes widen in absolute shock as she freezes in her tracks. In the drawing room, Countess Felon and another nobleman turn to greet her, with a voice calling out, "Perfect timing, come and have a seat." John's face darkens with anger as he stares coldly across the room. In disbelief, a voice exclaims, "What are you doing here?" Standing in the middle of the grand parlor, Harriet faces Countess Felon and her furious uncle, John. Turning back sharply, John argues, "There's no need for that, Aunt." Gesticulating wildly, John raises his voice. "I told you I came because I was worried about you." He yells out before she drags the name of House Felon through the mud. John points an accusing finger directly at Harriet's chest, leaving her speechless. Harriet looks on silently, her expression a mix of sorrow and quiet resignation. She bitterly recalls the banquet where John had aggressively confronted her and how quickly he ran to her great-aunt afterward. John continues to plead his case to the Countess, saying, "I don't know what lies Harriet has spun so far, but..." He continues his slander, claiming, "She used Bella's name to deceive men and shamed our family without batting an eye." Countess Felon closes her eyes wearily as John asks, "Do you know how agonizing it was to be her guardian?" The tense parlor remains silent as the high-stakes family dispute plays out. Harriet looks down sadly, thinking that her uncle's words will inevitably carry more weight with the Countess. John puts on a fake, jovial smile as he gesticulates, feeling confident in his arguments. Countess Felon sighs deeply, preparing to deliver her verdict. Looking back over her shoulder, the Countess declares, "Whether to believe it is for me to decide." Harriet's eyes widen in surprise at the Countess's unexpected response. Stunned, John asks, "Was my explanation not clear enough?" Only for the Countess to firmly respond, No, I understood you perfectly. John leaps up from his seat in a sudden fit of rage. Standing tall, John gapes in utter disbelief at his aunt's refusal to side with him. Trembling with anger, John is cut off as the Countess shuts him down, stating she has no need to hear any more. John stomps past Harriet, hissing, "Harriet, you'll pay for what you've done," causing her to flinch. John glares back over his shoulder one last time with deep resentment. The Countess calls out to him, saying, "Remember this one thing before you leave. House Felon stands." Turning her head with an icy glare, she delivers the final blow. Behind Harriet Listerwell. With a loud slam, John storms out of the parlor, leaving Harriet behind. Harriet stands quietly, watching the Countess's back as the heavy silence returns to the room. Staring out the window, Countess Felon asks, "Is it?" Walking closer, Harriet softly admits, "I didn't think you would cast me out right away." Harriet looks down, her cheeks flushing as she struggles with her emotions. The Countess sits regally, stating, "Listening to John made one thing clear." Looking at Harriet, the Countess admits, "I'm already afraid to hear your story." Harriet's eyes fill with tears of profound gratitude and relief. The Countess looks at her with a gentle, supportive expression, validating Harriet's struggles. Deeply moved, Harriet thinks that having someone so close on her side makes her feel like she is in a completely different world. Harriet bows deeply, promising, "I will tell you everything soon." Gently clearing her throat, the Countess asks, "It's cold. Could you ask him to bring some warm tea?" As she turns to fetch the tea, Harriet wonders, it's already early summer. Did she catch a cold? The scene transitions to the grand and imposing estate of the Duchy of Kalas. Harriet, holding a quill, sits in a plush drawing room, ready to resume her negotiations. Across the marble table, Duke Cedric sits regally, holding her proposal in his hand. Cedric's striking red eyes lock onto Harriet as he carefully reviews her terms. Harriet speaks up passionately, defending her business plan and marketing ideas. A light smirk plays on Cedric's lips, amused by her clever strategy. Placing the paper down, Cedric agrees, "Then let's keep the donation as it is." Harriet confidently taps her hand on the contract to seal her points. Harriet pitches, "I wish there was a place where they could buy it during promotion." Harriet enthusiastically explains her vision for a retail space designed to attract noblewomen. Intrigued by her proposal, Cedric smiles and says, "Selling while promoting? That's not a bad idea." Looking down from the grand study window, Cedric explains his strategy, stating that customers will run out of soap by the grand opening, giving them a reason to return. Harriet is deeply impressed, thinking to herself about how Cedric effortlessly came up with a brilliant business plan starting from just a single bar of soap. Duke Cedric sits poised and confident, speaking smoothly as he adjusts his collar and his elegant yellow waistcoat. Harriet looks at him with soft, glowing eyes, her cheeks flushing slightly as she admires his remarkable business acumen. In a transition, high society noblewomen look on with gasps of utter astonishment and curiosity. At a tea party, the ladies discuss the rumors, with one questioning how a single bar of soap could possibly achieve such miraculous results. Another noblewoman laughs cheerfully, fully engaged in the lively gossip surrounding the new beauty secret. To demonstrate the purity of the soap, a spoon scoops a small dollop of the smooth, creamy substance from the bar. The young lady playfully tastes a small bit of the soap, proving just how safe and natural its organic ingredients are. The surrounding ladies gasp in amazement at the bold demonstration, completely sold on the product's quality. Gazing into her vanity mirror, a noblewoman marvels at how exceptionally clear and radiant her complexion has become. She turns away with a delighted smile, gently touching her flawless skin in absolute awe. On a sunny afternoon, elegant ladies walk down the bustling shopping district as others watch from nearby shops. Standing before the beautifully designed storefront, a passing lady wonders in surprise if it is a specialty soap store. Two ladies stop to gossip about the newly opened shop, looking skeptical about its sudden appearance. A haughty, red-haired noblewoman scoffingly dismisses the trend, expressing disbelief that anyone would actually fall for such marketing. She continues her loud criticism, questioning how anyone could trust ingredients made by an impoverished convent. Standing nearby, a passing young woman stops in her tracks, startled by the harsh gossip. A wealthy blonde noblewoman carrying a frilly parasol walks away with an air of superior indifference. Hidden beneath her parasol, the noblewoman remains silent as she listens to the unfolding gossip. Suddenly, she bursts into a joyful, carefree laugh, thoroughly amused by the social drama. The skeptical noblewomen continue their conversation outside the store, completely unaware of the attention they are drawing. A close-up reveals a sly, smug smile playing on the lips of a woman watching the scene unfold. Peering through the glass, she wonders with mock concern if the others are suffering entirely because of her actions. Inside the quiet boutique, beautifully wrapped stacks of specialty soap are neatly displayed on tables, including a signature Castile soap. Harriet stands alone in her pristine new shop, looking around at the quiet room with a mixture of hope and anxiety. The elegant parlor is perfectly set up with beautiful displays, but the lack of customers leaves the atmosphere heavy and still. As Harriet carefully adjusts a bar of soap, the sudden, cheerful chime of the entrance bell startles her. Turning around with a racing heart, Harriet realizes that her very first customers have finally arrived. Two noblewomen step into the store, looking around curiously as Harriet watches them nervously. Harriet stands behind the counter, bracing herself as she hopes her hard work and carefully prepared gifts will be enough. She bitterly recalls the overwhelming social pressure, wondering how everyone could have chosen to attend Bella's tea party instead. Deep sorrow reflects in Harriet's bright green eyes as she remembers the painful sting of social exclusion. She visualizes Bella sitting triumphantly at her lavish tea party, surrounded by adoring guests and mountains of extravagant gifts. Shaking off the painful memory, Harriet clutches her chest, determined to stand strong and focus on the customers in front of her. One of the noblewomen, dressed in an elegant white gown and a lavish floral hat, quietly walks past the displays. The lady moves with quiet grace, her elaborate hat adorned with beautiful blue and white flowers. Realizing who the customer is, Harriet thinks to herself that she didn't recognize Lady Daphne Laurel at first because of her large hat. Harriet recalls the recent scandals whispered in high society about Lady Daphne and Lord Albert. She remembers the cruel gossip claiming that Daphne's engagement was on the verge of being broken off because she was deemed boring. Watching Daphne from behind, Harriet's expression softens with deep empathy, knowing how devastating Bella's rumors can be. Daphne stands silently, her downcast purple eyes filled with a profound, quiet melancholy. Harriet looks on with a heavy heart, feeling a deep connection to Daphne's pain since she has experienced the exact same cruelty. On the wooden stands, the specialized bay laurel soaps and delicate perfume bottles are beautifully presented. Daphne's companion gasps in delight, exclaiming that the cosmetic waters smell absolutely incredible. She excitedly turns to Daphne, urging her to pick one out together and asking which fragrance she prefers. Daphne gently closes her eyes, taking a soft breath to enjoy the soothing and comforting aroma. The companion steps closer to the displays while Daphne follows quietly, her interest slowly beginning to peak. Seizing the perfect opportunity, Harriet steps forward with a warm, radiant smile, holding up a beautifully crafted bottle of cosmetic water. The two noblewomen turn in surprise, their attention completely captured by Harriet's welcoming presence. Lady Daphne stands quietly inside the quiet boutique, her large hat casting a gentle shadow over her face. Daphne turns her gaze toward Harriet, whispering skeptically, "Miss Listerwell? I heard she entered a convent. Is she already out?" High society remembers Harriet as the woman who caused a massive scandal in the capital's social circle just a year ago. Harriet remembers how the rumors spread, visualizing her sister Bella standing triumphantly over her. Shaking off the past, Harriet maintains her composure and offers a gentle, pleasant smile to her customer. Cruel gossip echoes in Daphne's mind. Did you hear about Lady Daphne? Dark shadows of judgmental noblewomen gossip relentlessly behind Daphne's back, pretending to feel sorry for her. The whispers continue to mock her, snickering softly in the dark. A cold voice asks, "But wasn't it her fault that the engagement was broken in the first place?" Leaving Daphne feeling isolated in the grand ballroom. Sinking into despair, Daphne's lips tremble as the memory of the cruel whispers cuts deep. Snapping back to the present, Daphne turns in frustration, exclaiming defensively, "Why does that matter?" Looking sharply at Harriet, Daphne asks coldly, "Excuse me? Do you pity me too, Lady Harriet?" Her companion grabs Daphne's arm in a panic, calling out Daphne to try and stop her from causing a scene. Frustrated and hurt, Daphne turns away and walks toward the exit with her companion. Harriet calls out to her, warning, "The more you hide, the bolder Bella will become." Harriet steps forward, showing her determination to stand up to the injustice they both face. Harriet speaks directly, asking, "Isn't Lady Daphne a victim of Lord Albert Kingsley and Bella Listerwell?" Looking at Daphne with genuine sympathy, Harriet says, "I just want you to get over this as soon as possible, Lady Daphne." Daphne remembers sitting alone in her room, holding a bottle of cosmetic water in deep sadness. Her eyes had filled with quiet tears as she struggled with the pain of being discarded and mocked by high society. Harriet's words echo in her mind once again. "I just want you to get over this as soon as possible, Lady Daphne." Daphne recalls looking out her window, feeling completely trapped by the public shame. She had clutched the perfume bottle tightly, realizing Harriet was the only one who truly understood her pain. The scene shifts to the closed storefront of St. Clarissa's Soap Hub on a quiet day.
The front doors are tied shut with a black ribbon, indicating that the shop is temporarily closed.
Daphne returns to the boutique, peering curiously through the glass windows of the closed shop.
Daphne wonders, I thought she'd be at the shop to meet with the people from the monastery, but if it's closed, where could she be? Hearing footsteps, Daphne turns around in surprise to see Harriet approaching her from the street.
Daphne asks quietly, is it because there weren't many people yesterday? Assuming Harriet closed the shop due to the low turnout.
The shop sign stands quietly as the two women meet outside.
Harriet smiles warmly and asks, since you came back so soon, did the cosmetic water help?
Daphne is caught off guard, her cheeks turning slightly pink at the direct question.
Harriet looks at her with soft, encouraging eyes, waiting patiently for her response.
Daphne looks down shyly, her cold exterior completely melting away in Harriet's presence.
Harriet smiles brightly, happy to see that her creation has brought Daphne some peace. Harriet gently tells her, it's a bit late, but congratulations on your broken engagement.
Daphne stands completely frozen in utter disbelief at Harriet's unexpected words.
Harriet looks at Daphne with complete sincerity and warmth. Harriet points out that the only thing Daphne lost was a pathetic man who didn't deserve her.
Daphne stammers defensively, he wasn't pathetic.
Harriet counters softly, the more you think about it, the only thing that wasn't pathetic was your love. Daphne recalls how she was completely shunned and left to stand alone while others whispered behind pillars.
Looking at Harriet, Daphne thinks, but this is the first time we've actually spoken like this.
She looks at Harriet with a soft, glowing expression, realizing, I didn't know she was someone who offered this kind of comfort.
Daphne's eyes well up with tears of relief, and she lets out a soft, genuine smile.
The heavy tension completely vanishes as Daphne finally laughs cheerfully alongside Harriet. Meanwhile, inside a grand study, a stern voice demands, what on earth are you thinking, rushing to have an engagement ceremony already? Lord Albert Kingsley stands poised and unmoved, looking back with a cold, unbothered expression. Albert's father stands with his arms crossed, deeply displeased by his son's reckless social decisions. With a smug, dismissive smile, Albert remarks, giving up the position of my fiancé is a small price to pay. To introduce Angelic to high society, there is no faster card than bringing in Bella. The stage to crush Cedric Kailos will be set in no time. Harriet's pre-opening financial records reveal a total revenue of 14,950 DRM and a net profit of 6,850 DRM, showing that the shop has been a success despite the initial hurdles. Cedric Kailos sits comfortably on the sofa, carefully reviewing the ledger that Harriet has presented to him. Cedric looks closely at the financial summary, analyzing the numbers with a serious and focused expression. Well, Harriet Listerwell starts nervously, sitting across from Cedric as she waits for his reaction to her performance. There were no issues with the shop or the products. If there is a problem, Harriet trails off, trying to pinpoint where things went wrong with her grand opening. Harriet bitterly recalls how everyone attended Bella's tea party instead of her shop opening, realizing that Bella hates seeing her get any good publicity. Sinking into deep thought, Harriet's expression is filled with worry as she reflects on the social pressure and her sister's interference. Cedric quietly observes Harriet's anxious demeanor, letting her speak as he holds her financial records. Cedric looks at Harriet with soft, understanding eyes, preparing to offer his thoughts on her situation. Harriet looks up with a surprised and curious expression as Cedric begins to address her concerns directly. Her eyes widen in mild astonishment as she listens closely to his reassuring and insightful words. Harriet visualizes herself in a beautiful yellow gown, holding a beautifully packaged bar of soap as a perfect presentation. In a brightly lit artist studio, the cheerful portrait artist stands before his canvas while Cedric watches over Harriet, who sits elegantly on the couch. Harriet looks down at the soap sample in her hands, feeling slightly self-conscious and awkward in her elaborate yellow gown. Because I, Harriet Listerwell, won't be in them. You're quite... Harriet confidently asserts her independence, leaving Cedric deeply intrigued by her confidence. A close-up of Harriet's radiant golden-green eyes as she blushes slightly under Cedric's intense gaze. Something only found here? Didn't you say you would handle the marketing, Lady Harriet? Cedric asks with a gentle, questioning smile. The portrait artist beams with pure joy, completely delighted by the lively interactions between Cedric and Harriet. In an adorable chibi style, Harriet stands nervously clutching her soap, sweat dropping as she tries to maintain her composure. Puffed! The artist stifles a giggle at Harriet's adorable stiffness, while Cedric stands beside him, watching her with silent amusement. The artist smiles warmly at Harriet, encouraging her to relax and look more natural for her portrait. Harriet protests with a flushed face and wide-open mouth, trying to explain her nervous posture to the two men.
From a behind-the-shoulder view, Harriet sits on the sofa while the artist holds his paintbrush, thinking about the best way to capture her likeness. That's understandable if it's been a while, the artist remarks thoughtfully, looking at Harriet with a warm smile. Pardon? Harriet asks in surprise, turning back to look at the artist and Cedric in confusion. Cedric's crimson eyes lock onto Harriet, studying her with a profound, captivating intensity. Harriet looks down nervously, shifting her hands in her lap as she feels the overwhelming weight of Cedric's gaze. Close-up of Cedric's striking red eyes as he continues to focus entirely on Harriet's delicate features.
Cedric steps closer and gently reaches out, placing his fingers under Harriet's chin to lift her head up.
Cedric leans in close, holding her chin gently as they lock eyes in a quiet, intensely romantic moment. Cedric's warm hand cradles her chin with surprising tenderness, bringing a sudden halt to the room's bustling energy. Harriet blushes furiously, her breath catching as she gazes up at Cedric's handsome face so close to hers. "Ah," Harriet whispers softly, completely spellbound by his touch as her bright green eyes meet his gaze. "Perfect," Cedric says with a soft, captivating smile, thoroughly pleased with the pose he has adjusted. Harriet looks down bashfully, her cheeks flushed with pink as a beautiful arrangement of white flowers frames her delicate posture. Cedric stares down at her with a quiet, deep intensity, his expression softening as he gazes at her shy reaction. Cedric clasps his hands behind his back and stands calmly, while Harriet stands behind him, still feeling a bit flustered. The enthusiastic portrait artist sparkles with excitement, fully inspired by the wonderful chemistry and tension between the two. "Probably because I only recently returned to the country," Cedric explains calmly, stepping away from the sofa as the artist continues to paint. The blonde artist smiles brightly, holding his paintbrush as he shares a light-hearted conversation with Cedric and Harriet. "I was at St. Clarissa Convent before returning to Genoa," the artist mentions tearfully, gesturing with his paintbrush. A close-up text box dramatically highlights the whispers surrounding Harriet Listerwell, the scandalous woman. Since she's at Clarissa Convent, is she going to become a nun? Well, makes sense. I heard she was already notorious as a scandal maker. The artist recalls the high society gossip he overheard. The artist suddenly panics and breaks out in a sweat as he turns to see Cedric standing rigidly by the window, looking incredibly displeased. Cedric stands with his arms crossed, looking out the window with a cold, unbothered expression of complete indifference. Back in the present, Harriet tilts her head in confusion with a question mark floating over her head, wondering about the sudden shift in the room's atmosphere. As evening falls, a lavish blue carriage travels smoothly past the grand estates under a gorgeous sunset-streaked sky. "Yes, this is the first time since I was a child," Harriet thinks to herself as she rides inside the elegant carriage opposite a composed Cedric. Cedric sits calmly inside the carriage, looking down thoughtfully with a gentle expression. Cedric looks forward, his striking red eyes fixed on Harriet with a quiet, intense focus. Harriet sits opposite him in her lovely yellow gown, looking slightly surprised and self-conscious. Harriet blushes, raising a gloved hand to her cheek as she tries to hide her embarrassment. Suddenly, the carriage wheel hits a large bump on the cobblestone road with a sharp jolt. Sudden impact causes Harriet to lose her balance, sending her tumbling forward. Cedric catches her quickly, wrapping his arms around her to steady her as the carriage sways. Harriet finds herself held close against Cedric, her eyes wide with surprise at the sudden intimacy. Mortified, Harriet hastily pulls back and stammers, "Sorry," as she tries to regain her composure. Harriet gasps, her heart racing as she looks at Cedric in complete embarrassment. Cedric watches her closely, his crimson gaze peering through the strands of her brown hair. A quiet, romantic tension fills the air as the two share an intense, unspoken moment of closeness. Their eyes lock, reflecting a mixture of surprise and sudden, captivating interest. Harriet frantically searches around, asking herself, "Where is my handkerchief?" as she tries to distract herself. Cedric reaches up to adjust his cravat, looking away as he composedly processes the sudden touch. Sitting back on her seat, Harriet blushes furiously, thinking, of all times to trip and have this happen, I should ask Teacher Lucia to let me rewrite the report diary. The elegant carriage finally comes to a halt outside the grand estate under the warm sunset. Turning towards Cedric, Harriet nods quickly and replies, "Ah, yes." She looks down nervously, a sweat drop on her cheek as she feels incredibly self-conscious. Cedric steps out first and extends a gloved hand to help Harriet descend from the carriage. Taking his hand, Harriet thinks to herself, I guess he's letting it slide as an accident. Standing on the terrace at sunset, Harriet bows slightly and says, "I'm in your debt, Your Grace. Thank you for helping with the promotion." She prepares to board her own carriage, nodding politely as she says, "Well then." As the carriage pulls away, Harriet looks back out the window and says, "Going now." Cedric stands quietly on the terrace, watching her carriage disappear into the sunset as a gentle breeze blows by. He watches a leaf drift past, his expression soft and contemplative. Inside his study, a hand places a document on the table. A voice announces, "This is the promotional copy she requested," revealing the sacred text written on the draft. Cedric sits opposite his blonde friend in the library, asking calmly, "Like what?" His friend leans in close, staring at Cedric with a funny and incredibly suspicious expression. Pointing toward the table next to a covered painting, his friend exclaims in disbelief, "The Harriet Listerwell? Do you know how shocked I was?" His friend's eyes widen in absolute bewilderment at Cedric's unexpected decision. Exasperated, his friend asks, "What is wrong with you? You're the one who absolutely despised getting caught up in cheap rumors." His friend scratches the back of his head, sighing in disbelief at Cedric's sudden change of heart. That she was a scandal maker, his friend points out, reminding Cedric of Harriet's infamous social reputation. Cedric rests his chin on his hand, repeating thoughtfully to himself, "For a scandal maker." The scene cuts back to Harriet, who looks incredibly shocked with her mouth wide open in astonishment. Back in the library, Cedric calmly commands his friend, "Just hand over the drawing." Smiling cheerfully, his friend pulls the white sheet off the canvas and replies, "Understood, Your Grace." The sheet reveals a stunning portrait of Harriet Listerwell posing elegantly in her yellow gown while holding a bar of soap. Inside the store, a crowd of noblewomen stands in absolute awe, staring up at the grand portrait hanging on the wall. The elegant script at the bottom of the portrait reads, "As I wash away thy sins, so shall thou be saved." A young pink-haired noblewoman clutches her hands together, staring at the painting with starry, completely captivated eyes. Outside St. Clarissa's soap hub, noblewomen gather and wonder aloud, does that mean this soap washes away sins too? Noblewomen gasp excitedly as they look through the boutique's beautifully decorated windows. Inside the bustling shop, a customer urges, "We have to buy it while there's still some left," as a crowd gathers around the displays. The pink-haired noblewoman is completely devastated to find the shelves empty, crying out, "What? It's already sold out?" In a lavishly decorated parlor, a group of high society ladies sits comfortably on plush sofas, sipping tea and gossiping. One noblewoman smiles brightly and says, "Really? I'm so jealous, Lady Viviana." Another lady joins in, adding, "I know, but you have to use it consistently to see results. I'm worried because I don't have much soap left." Lady Viviana looks to the side with a thoughtful expression as she listens to her friends praise the sensational soap. "I wish I could, but I only have one left myself," one lady sighs, while another replies, "I figured as much." Looking curious, the blonde lady asks, "Maybe Lady Bella can get some?" Another lady chimes in excitedly. After all, she is Harriet's cousin, while Bella sits on the sofa listening to their chatter. "Wasn't the poster's tagline hilarious? Wash away sins and gain salvation?" One lady giggles, while another adds, "Right, since Harriet is the model, it was so fitting. I laughed so hard." Bella smiles subtly behind her ornate lace fan, listening to the high society ladies laugh at her cousin's expense. A dramatic screen displays the title, "Harriet's Cousin." The other ladies watch Bella closely as she holds her fan, waiting to see how she will react to the mention of her notorious cousin. Bella lowers her fan slightly, her bright green eyes filled with a mixture of sadness and quiet contemplation. The ladies continue to murmur amongst themselves, whispering, "But then again, she..." Bella hides a sly smirk behind her fan as the bubble asks, who would want a scandal maker in their family? One of the ladies turns to Bella and asks, "Would it really be that hard to get us some soap?" A red-haired woman in a gray and white dress stands up suddenly, looking shocked and highly offended by the conversation. Looking down at Caroline, the red-haired woman speaks firmly as the others watch the sudden tension. Standing beside her friend, the blonde lady tries to defend herself, stammering, "No, I didn't mean it like that." The red-haired lady stands rigidly with a displeased look, while Caroline remains seated, looking deeply uncomfortable. Caroline's eyes narrow in pain and frustration as she exclaims, "You know how much I suffered because of that." In a painful flashback, three young noblemen stand on a balcony, laughing and cruelly asking, "The ugliest girl in Bella's clique?" The memory continues as a young Caroline stands weeping alone in the spotlight, deeply wounded by the harsh judgment of her peers. Caroline remembers the cruel comments about her bad skin ruining people's moods, causing her to cry bitterly in her memory. Back in the parlor, Caroline points at herself in emotional distress, venting her long-held frustrations to the other ladies. Clenching her eyes shut as she holds back tears, Caroline screams out, "Stop it, Viviana!" Viviana asks defensively, "Caroline, why are you making a scene? Bella doesn't even seem to mind." Bella sits in complete silence behind her fan, her bright green eyes looking unusually cold and distant. Caroline stops her outburst, looking at Bella in sudden surprise and confusion. Lowering her fan slightly, Bella offers a polite but unsettling smile, saying calmly, "I'm fine, I don't mind at all." Bella's perfect smile remains fixed as she repeats reassuringly, "I'm fine, I don't mind at all." Caroline stares at her in complete disbelief, chilled by Bella's strange, unbothered reaction. Bella sits gracefully on her sofa, maintaining her elegant posture as the other ladies continue to watch. "Oh my, she's ignoring your letters, Bella?" one lady whispers, noticing the quiet tension. Bella continues to smile pleasantly behind her fan, completely masking her true feelings as Caroline watches her. Caroline looks down nervously with a sweat drop on her cheek, thinking to herself, something is off. Looking at the parlor from a wide angle, Caroline sits alone on her sofa and thinks, she didn't seem like the Bella I used to know. The scene shifts to the stunning promotional poster of Harriet Listerwell holding the soap, which is lying on a library table. Roxana stands with her arms crossed, looking down sternly at the print while Harriet sits beside her looking sheepish. Roxana studies the print with a serious, evaluating expression. Harriet sits quietly, looking down with a thoughtful and slightly nervous expression. In another room, a dignified lady in a brown gown sits comfortably on a sofa, sipping her tea while reading the newspaper. Harriet looks up at Roxana in surprise, her eyes wide as they discuss the promotional campaign. Harriet recalls her arrival in Genoa, remembering the carriage and the people who welcomed her. Roxana closes her eyes and shakes her head, looking slightly exasperated. Harriet reacts with comical shock, her mouth wide open as she listens to Roxana's strict analysis. Roxana maintains her folded arms, looking down at Harriet with a stern, unwavering gaze. A flashback reveals the Countess of St. Clarissa handing over a card commanding, "Roxana, you teach her and test whether she is worthy." Roxana keeps her cool, calculating blue eyes fixed on Harriet, evaluating her potential. Roxana explains the situation, mentioning her interactions with the Duke of Kailas during their very first meeting. A split portrait of the Countess of St. Clarissa and Harriet appears as the text box dramatically reads, "Miss Harriet." Roxana sighs with closed eyes while Harriet slumps in her seat, feeling completely overwhelmed by the expectations. Harriet tilts her head in confusion as Roxana suddenly shifts her attention back to her. "On behalf of my great aunt, right?" Harriet asks, to which Roxana replies, "Yes, the Countess often has me act as her representative." Harriet looks forward with a nervous sweat drop on her cheek, thinking in frustration about the Duke. "I find him hard to read." Roxana crosses her arms and looks at Harriet with a sharp, incredulous glare, declaring, "You're a total highway robber." Sunlight filters through the window as Harriet reflects on Roxana's strict lessons, thinking, "They say learning is endless, and so is a teacher's grace. It's a nice sentiment, but I almost fell for it." Inside the quiet, bookshelf-lined study, Roxana stands by the table and carefully examines the documents spread out before her. Sitting beside Roxana in the grand library, Harriet nods thoughtfully as she admits that even I couldn't figure him out. Cedric sits quietly in his study, looking contemplative as he adjusts his collar under the soft light. Harriet stares with her vibrant green eyes, deeply puzzled as she wonders to herself, he calculates his expressions? She remembers a moment when Cedric chuckled genuinely over a document, saying, "A puppy, I like it," his bright laughter echoing in her mind. A close-up of Cedric reveals his intense crimson-colored eyes beneath his neatly styled blonde hair. Harriet recalls the gentle curl of his lips, realizing that his laugh did not seem calculated at all. Sitting alone at the desk, Harriet looks down at the poster of herself holding the soap and reflects, he helped so much with the business. Harriet rests in her chair, her brow slightly furrowed as she carefully weighs her options. Suddenly, Harriet's cheeks flush bright pink as she feels a wave of embarrassment washing over her. Roxana continues her work at the desk while Harriet sits beside her, completely lost in her own stressful thoughts. Harriet looks to the side with a determined expression, trying to figure out how to handle her delicate situation. She pictures Cedric smiling warmly at her, his gentle expression making her heart skip a beat. Harriet clasps her hand to her chest, her face lighting up as she searches for the perfect gift, wondering, what could I give him that wouldn't feel too burdensome? A beautifully wrapped white gift box with a red ribbon is presented on a silver platter, as a voice asks, "Would you like to try it?" A beautiful blonde noblewoman with striking blue eyes looks delighted at the elegant gift, exclaiming, "Oh my, what is this? The packaging is so lovely." Sitting at opposite ends of a long, lavish dining table, the Duke explains, I recently made a small investment in a beauty products business, prompting the lady to repeat in surprise, invested in beauty products? The noblewoman looks across the table, noticing the Duke's unusually bright demeanor and wondering, why does he look so happy today? She stares at the beautifully packaged soap on her tray, her blue eyes wide with curiosity and mild confusion. The Duke elegantly cuts a piece of steak on his plate, completely composed and refined in his movements. As the two continue their meal in the grand dining room, the Duke explains, they say it's a business to help St. Clarissa Convent achieve self-reliance. The lady gasps softly, saying, ah, as a realization dawns upon her. She remembers the grim battlefield of the past where wounded soldiers lay suffering, and the holy name of St. Clarissa Convent was their only source of hope and healing. Sitting in her chair, a shadow of grief falls over the noblewoman's face as she realizes he must have thought of Lauren. Across the table, the Duke sits rigidly in his elegant white suit, his expression turning cold and neutral once again. She recalls the heartbreaking memory of Lauren resting in a coffin surrounded by white lilies, thinking since Lauren's departure, he rarely shows his true feelings. A sad smile touches the lady's lips as she laments to herself, I don't even have the right to feel hurt, do I? She closes her eyes slowly, holding back the heavy emotions and regrets of the past. In her memories, a young woman weeps bitterly in the dark hallways of the palace, devastated by a tragic loss. A young, red-eyed Cedric watches the scene silently from behind a cracked door, his expression blank but deeply affected. Back in the present, the lady bows her head in quiet sorrow, thinking to herself, it's all my fault. She looks up at the Duke, wondering with a heavy heart, is that why he became someone who chooses duty over his own feelings? The Duke continues to eat his meal in silence, completely unaware of the melancholy thoughts running through his mother's mind. Breaking the heavy silence, the Duke looks up with his striking red eyes and asks calmly, do you not like the soap? Quickly masking her sadness, the noblewoman bursts into a bright, cheerful laugh, reassuring him with a warm smile. She proudly declares, setting trends in high society is my specialty after all, to which the Duke smiles subtly and replies, I'm glad to have such a reliable mother. After the meal, a butler approaches the dining table and bends down to whisper something privately in the Duke's ear. Hearing the butler's message, the Duke's relaxed expression instantly tightens into a serious, alert look. The butler looks down nervously, a sweat drop rolling down his cheek as he delivers the urgent report. Leaning in close, the butler quietly informs him, the person who caused the disturbance. The Duke's eyes widen in sudden surprise as he absorbs the unexpected news. The butler continues his hushed explanation, keeping his voice low so as not to alert the Duchess. The butler finishes his report, revealing, is said to be Lady Harriet Listerwell. Inside a luxurious carriage, a hand holds up a dusty, elegant bottle of Van Libel champagne from the year 866. The Duke looks down at the expensive bottle of champagne in his hands, muttering thoughtfully, champagne. He rests the vintage bottle against his knee, looking incredibly elegant in his embroidered gold vest. Sitting inside the plush carriage, the Duke holding the bottle looks across at Harriet, who is sitting opposite him. Harriet groans in frustration, explaining the chaotic scene from a moment ago when a rowdy man was dragged away by guards while shouting, "Do you know who I am? Lady, say something," leaving Harriet completely bewildered. Sitting across from each other in the quiet parlor, the Duke rests his hand near the vintage champagne bottle, while Harriet sits opposite him, waiting for his response. Harriet looks over at the table, her golden yellow eyes wide with curiosity as she watches the Duke's silent reaction. Looking down at the floral design on the package, Harriet begins to speak softly, saying, well, Harriet recalls her conversation with Roxana in the library, admitting, I doubt he would need most things, and I'm not sure if he'd even accept it, to which Roxana had agreed, I suppose you're right. Roxana had looked up thoughtfully, tapping her chin as she added, but if I had to choose. Back in the present, Harriet gestures toward the vintage bottle and says warmly, you might already have one, but I still wanted to express my gratitude. Thank you for helping with the soap business. Leaning back comfortably, the Duke looks at her with a knowing expression and remarks, usually when people give me things like this, they want something in return. Harriet blinks in complete surprise, caught off guard by his cynical response. A subtle, genuine chuckle escapes the Duke's lips as he adjusts his collar. The Duke points out a 1866 vintage. That's a meaningful year for you, Miss Harriet, leaving Harriet staring at him in sudden shock. In a comical daydream, a terrified brown bear sweats nervously while a confused bird with red eyes watches it in complete disbelief. The Duke rests his chin on his hand, looking out the window in contemplative silence. He sighs softly, his sharp crimson eyes reflecting a deep, heavy memory as he mutters, "I suppose so." In a dark memory of that fateful year, a finger points to the date 1866 on a tragic report. The head of the Listerwell family and his wife drowned in the lake at Albrecht Park. The law had been revised 2 years prior, allowing his young daughter to inherit the title if there was a will, but two young girls in mourning attire stand close to their new guardian in the rain. As the record states, since no such will was found, the head's younger brother, John Listerwell, inherited the title. A dark trail of rumors and scandals follows, showing letters intercepted and a lady at a masquerade. She intercepted a letter Julian Faith sent to Bella Listerwell and replied in her stead. Once again impersonating Bella Listerwell, she extorted flowers and gifts from various men. She even used Bella Listerwell's invitation to attend a masquerade ball and engage in scandalous behavior. Dark whispers of society echo through the family history. The libertine of high society, the disgrace of the Listerwell family, consumed by jealousy toward her cousin. Cedric's intense crimson eyes narrow slightly as he remembers the heavy weight of those years. In his memories, a mysterious lady in a dark red gown sits on a throne, surrounded by shadows of the noblemen she manipulated. Harriet sits up straight on the sofa, her hand placed gently over her heart as she listens to him. She maintains her polite, gentle smile, trying to keep her composure despite the tension in the room. The Duke continues to study her carefully, his expression unreadable as he leans on his hand. Looking at her earnest expression, the Duke reflects to himself, "You defy my expectations at every turn." Harriet's eyes widen as she senses the shift in his gaze. The Duke's silent observation of her continues, his thoughts echoing, "And your actions are entirely unpredictable." Suddenly, Harriet bursts into a bright, carefree laugh, her face lighting up with genuine amusement as the Duke thinks in surprise, "What a strange woman." The Duke watches her in quiet fascination as her bright laughter fills the spacious, elegant room. Pausing her laughter, Harriet blinks in confusion and asks, "What?" From a wide angle of the parlor, Harriet rests her hands on her lap and admits, "I suppose I was a bit annoyed by the situation itself." The Duke recalls a bleak, rain-drenched battlefield of his youth, remembering, "The shock of losing my father hadn't even faded." At a celebratory banquet, a smug nobleman had clapped him on the shoulder, declaring, "We won the war, so shouldn't we celebrate?" He remembers the anger he had to suppress, thinking, "Even in front of the scum who rejoiced at my father's death." As expensive champagne was poured, the young Duke had to keep a perfectly stoic mask. "I had to hold it together and not let anything go wrong." Standing tall in his pristine white suit, he had forced himself to remain composed amidst the hypocritical crowd. A memory of a tense confrontation arises, and in the midst of all that, the brooch I had briefly entrusted to a knight suddenly went missing. The Duke remembers looking over in surprise as a whisper rose from the crowd, "Isn't that the brooch pinned to her dress?" As the narration continues, and when it was finally found, a group of high society ladies had gathered to mock a quiet noblewoman, murmuring, "That massive ruby makes it look so outdated, doesn't it?" Back in the present, the Duke explains the significance of the item, starting, "Because my late father's—" Harriet gasps softly, her eyes wide with deep sympathy as the truth dawns on her. The Duke continues calmly, "Otherwise, things would have escalated." He sits with his hands clasped and legs crossed, looking completely refined and at peace with the past. Harriet gazes at him, her heart aching for the heavy burdens he had to carry all on his own. In his memory, the young Duke gently touches the ruby brooch pinned to his lapel, finding comfort in his father's legacy. Harriet looks forward with a soft, understanding gaze, realizing the depth of his actions. She remembers the quiet palace corridor where she stood before him, a simple and sincere moment of trust between them. Looking at him sitting across from her, Harriet thinks with a gentle smile, "Back then, he believed me." A warm, beautiful smile graces Harriet's face as her cheeks flush pink, filled with gratitude. The Duke closes his eyes, a soft, incredibly warm and genuine smile touching his lips in return. The two of them sit in comfortable, peaceful harmony, the light of the setting sun casting a warm glow over the entire parlor. Outside the grand, columned entrance of the mansion, the white carriage slowly pulls away as evening settles over the beautiful estate. Standing in his sunlit office, the Duke gazes out the large window while his butler waits attentively behind him, holding an elegant dark box. The butler reports that the opening sales for the St. Clarissa soap business were quite good, prompting a subtle, thoughtful nod from the Duke. Holding the decorative wooden box, the butler looks at the Duke with a puzzled and slightly hesitant expression. The butler speaks up, admitting, "I don't quite understand." He points out that even at its largest scale, St. Clarissa's soap business is trivial by their standards. The butler continues, "While it's true that Lady Harriet is highly capable, I don't understand why you are personally overseeing such a business, Duke." The Duke remains quiet for a moment before replying softly, "Well?" Looking out toward the courtyard, the Duke explains, "Let's just say I'm repaying a debt of gratitude to the convent." The butler remembers the past, noting St. Clarissa Convent was the only one who did so. A quiet silence fills the room as the butler watches the Duke, lost in his thoughts, looking out at the beautiful sunset. The warm light of the sunset silhouettes the Duke as he reflects in quiet contemplation. Duke thinks to himself, "Yes, this is to repay a debt to St. Clarissa Convent." The carriage slowly drives away along the stone path, leaving the magnificent estate behind in the late afternoon sun. The scene shifts as a solemn thought begins with, "But," he questions his own actions, wondering, "Before I heard that Harriet Listerwell went to that convent, why didn't I think of repaying them?" In his thoughts, Harriet's gentle face appears, prompting the Duke to question his true motivations for helping. As night falls, a quiet peace settles over Harriet's bedroom, visible through the large glass windows. Harriet tosses and turns in bed, unable to sleep as her mind remains filled with thoughts of their meeting. She stares up at the ceiling, her striking golden yellow eyes reflecting her deep, restless contemplation. She remembers the Duke's serious, commanding presence and the intense look in his crimson eyes. She blinks slowly, her thoughts returning to their quiet, intimate conversation in the parlor. Clasping her hands close, she remembers the moment of trust and thinks with relief, "He believed me." On a beautiful, sunny afternoon, a group of noblewomen gather for a leisurely picnic under the shade of a massive green tree. A young lady nervously clasps her hands together over her chest, trying to calm her racing heart. Taking a deep breath, the young lady sighs softly, her expression filled with worry and nervous anticipation. Sitting opposite her, Bella Listerwell happily chats with her friends, completely relaxed and enjoying the sunny day. Bella bursts into a sweet, radiant laugh, her beautiful golden curls framing her cheerful face. The brown-haired girl watches Bella's radiant smile, urgently thinking to herself, "Hurry!" In her thoughts, she reflects, "I thought he was mad at me after that day, but I guess I was wrong." Just then, a handsome young nobleman walks toward them, holding a magnificent, massive bouquet of vibrant red roses. The breathtaking arrangement of blooming red roses sparkles brilliantly in the afternoon light. Kneeling gracefully before her, the young man presents the flowers and asks, "Lady Bella, will you accept my feelings along with this bouquet?" As a friend calls out his name in surprise. "Adam!" Blushing furiously, he eagerly declares, "Of course it doesn't compare to your beauty." The brown-haired girl freezes in absolute shock, her eyes wide as she witnesses the heartbreaking scene unfold. Bella demurely turns her head away, her expression elegant and composed, leaving the kneeling young man waiting anxiously for her answer. Looking at him with a soft, gentle smile, Bella begins to reject him, saying, "I already." Sipping her tea, the red-haired lady murmurs with a hint of worry, "Oh dear." Bella continues her polite refusal, saying, "But my dear friend." Bella delivers a crushing blow, stating calmly, "Once I heard Viviana had feelings for you, I never saw you as a man." Viviana's face turns pale with horror as her deepest, most private secret is suddenly laid bare in front of everyone. The atmosphere instantly turns hostile as Adam looks down with a cold, repulsed expression, thinking, "She looks too disgusted to even touch." Without another word, he turns on his heel and storms off, leaving a heavy, tense silence in his wake. Devastated and humiliated, Viviana sits frozen in silence, her eyes staring blankly at the ground. A hot, painful tear wells up in her eye and begins to spill over, reflecting her deep emotional pain. Behind her beautiful parasol, Bella lets out a cruel, triumphant smile, thoroughly enjoying her friend's humiliation. Realization dawning on her, Viviana looks up at Bella in shock and asks, "Could it be? Did you set this up on purpose?" The memory fades back to the past, reminding her of the malicious intent ever since then. The painful truth echoes in her mind, knowing that I liked Adam Hoffner. Crying out through her tears, Viviana demands, "Is this what you wanted?" The other ladies look on with cold indifference, completely unbothered by Viviana's heartbreaking despair. "What do you mean by—" Viviana gasps in sudden panic as a sharp voice cuts through the warm, sunny afternoon. The red-haired girl steps forward angrily, shouting, "Just because you got rejected doesn't mean you can take it out on others." As the other ladies turn on her, one demands, "So are you saying Bella did something wrong?" While another sneers, "Lady Viviana, you're acting very strange today." Left utterly speechless, Viviana stands frozen as tears of frustration and humiliation well up in her eyes. Unable to bear their cold glares any longer, Viviana turns and runs away as fast as her legs can carry her. Me? Watching her run off, Harriet stands quietly under her parasol, wondering to herself, am I the only one who saw Bella's expression? A harsh whisper echoes in the air. That's why you got rejected by Lord Hoffner. Surrounded by cruel rumors, Viviana shrinks into the darkness as the voices echo, Viviana? The ugliest one in Bella's clique? And, people need to know their place. She looks too disgusting to even touch. Weeping bitterly in her loneliness, Viviana cries out to the empty room. What did I even do wrong? Back in the past, an accusing voice demands, so are you saying Bella did something wrong? Standing defensively in the grand parlor, Harriet desperately explains, I only did what Bella asked me to do. The ladies cross their arms coldly, snapping, can't you see Bella almost got hurt because of you? Stop making excuses. As another chimes in, yeah, Harriet, you're being weird today. Bowing her head in defeat, Harriet pleads, no, really, I didn't do it. Tears streaming down her face, she begs them, I mean it, please, just listen to me, please. Back in the present, Harriet sits calmly in her parlor, taking a quiet sip of her tea as she listens to her guest. Sitting across from her, Viviana weeps softly into her handkerchief, her shoulders trembling with genuine remorse. Setting her cup down, Harriet asks coolly, to ask me to accept your apology? Viviana looks up with red, swollen eyes and pleads, no, I just wanted to apologize. Clenching her hands in her lap, Viviana sniffles miserably, muttering, I'm really hopeless. Watching her guest break down, Harriet reflects silently. Seeing her cry like this, somehow it doesn't feel that satisfying. Harriet rises gracefully from her seat, leaving the weeping Viviana behind as she walks across the room. She steps over to a side table, her expression thoughtful and composed. Placing a small, elegant box on the table before Viviana, Harriet says calmly, I heard you needed this. Viviana blinks through her tears, staring at the mysterious gift in absolute bewilderment. Get a grip, Viviana. Leaning in closer, Harriet warns her in a serious tone, knowing Bella, she won't stop here. Her golden yellow eyes narrow with intense focus as she continues, of what's in her grasp. Even if she pushes you away for now, she'll eventually try to win you back. Viviana clasps her hands to her chest, her face pale as the weight of Harriet's warning sinks in. Harriet's final words linger heavily in the room, because you will have to face her again. Meanwhile, at a secretive, dimly lit masquerade ball, an elegant woman in a dark floral dress sits quietly at the bar. A handsome nobleman approaches her from behind, declaring smoothly, it is. Leaning in close, the man asks, what have you been up to all this time? To which she replies with a sly smile, oh, nothing much. Swirling a small, beautifully crafted purple vial, she murmurs, I heard it's a drug that makes you feel good. The nobleman chuckles confidently, pointing out, you'd have to be an idiot not to know. Is that so? With a graceful flick of her wrist, she spills a row of the glowing purple vials across the bar top, drawing gasps of surprise from the patrons. Smiling beautifully behind her white lace mask, she proclaims, we should share and enjoy them together, right? She raises her glass of red wine to her lips, watching the chaotic scene unfold with a dark, satisfied grin. Ah, how amusing. As she turns and walks out of the room, leaving unconscious bodies slumped over the furniture, she thinks triumphantly, I get to laugh while Harriet gets her hands dirty. A little acting is all it takes to set things in motion. Now that I've set the stage, Albert should know what my share is. But... Walking down a quiet, high-ceilinged corridor, she ponders, should I play along with him a little today? First, I must make him realize. Opening the door to a spacious, dimly lit room, she calls out sweetly, Lord Albert? Sitting elegantly on a blue sofa, the dark-haired Lord Albert turns his head, greeting her coldly, you're here? As his inner thoughts continue, can never be satisfied without me. Leaning over his shoulder with a playful smile, she asks eagerly, what happened with Angelic? With a soft sigh, she drapes herself gracefully across his lap, looking up at him with complete adoration. Looking down at her beautiful face, he replies calmly, they were highly satisfied. As he gently strokes her blonde hair, a cold, manipulative smirk plays on his lips. I really am lucky to stumble upon such a useful pawn. Looking up at him with deep affection, she whispers, Lord Albert, completely unaware of the cold calculation in his piercing green eyes. I took a little bit of the drug too, she whispers, looking completely dazed and intoxicated, her striking green eyes hazy as she smiles. Her smile turns sly and mysterious as she murmurs, if it's addictive, people will cling to it. Lying across Lord Albert's lap on the plush blue sofa, she says playfully, "Then you can do whatever you want, Lord Albert," while he looks down at her impressed. Smiling coldly, Lord Albert thinks to himself, "Most men would have fallen for this. I'm truly lucky to have the golden rose of Genoa as my business partner." He gently runs his fingers through her golden blonde hair as she rests peacefully on his lap. Staring up at him with her glowing green eyes, she thinks to herself, "Since you're offering your own body to prove its efficacy." Leaning down close, Lord Albert holds her as they share an intimate moment together on the sofa. The elegant velvet box opens to reveal the glowing purple bottles of Angelic, a drug that soothes depression and restores vitality to a lethargic body. Smiling proudly beside his son, the nobleman presents the box, declaring, "It is a new drug my son is very ambitiously preparing." Inside the grand parlor, one of the guests gasps in surprise, exclaiming, "My goodness, how can you say such a thing about a life-saving medicine?" Lord Albert watches him quietly as the guest continues, even though it has not been officially released yet. An older, mustachioed nobleman chuckles and remarks, "For simple businessman to have such a soft heart?" Turning to the host, he praises him, saying, "Your noble intentions are truly remarkable." Smiling warmly, the nobleman sitting across from him asks, "Do you have any interest in investing in Angelic?" Sitting elegantly across from them, the handsome, red-eyed Duke listens to their presentation with a cool, unreadable expression. Lord Albert confidently steps forward, explaining, "Its efficacy has already been proven to some extent by reviews." A tense silence fills the air as Albert wonders to himself, does he really have to ask him? Hoping to win the Duke's favor, the nobleman adds, "With the backing of the ducal house, things would progress much more smoothly. Of course, I would like to help." Looking at them coldly, the Duke replies firmly, "Unless you disclose the ingredients and exact effects, I cannot offer support." Lord Albert's expression turns rigid and displeased at the sudden, uncompromising rejection. A heavy, awkward sigh ripples through the parlor as the other guests exchange worried glances. The nobleman sits back in frustration, complaining, "To be so cautious over a promising business that only needs formalities." He sneers maliciously, muttering, "Your constant hesitation and everything is just like Rowan." Hearing his father's name spoken so disrespectfully, the Duke's hand clenches the armrest in silent, boiling fury. How dare he? Glaring at the speaker with cold, piercing crimson eyes, the Duke thinks, "How should I cure him of his habit of speaking so lightly of my father?" He reflects bitterly. A base inferiority complex manifests in the way one tears others down. The memory of his parents' beautiful wedding ceremony flashes before his eyes. He recalls the malicious gossip that echoed in the cathedral, the rumor that my father only loved my mother for her background. Since they couldn't touch his status, they dragged down his sincerity instead. His uncle had whispered deceitfully, "As his twin, I know Rowan best," sowing seeds of doubt because anxiety could seep through the smallest crack. And those who expanded their power in that gap as close allies of the imperial family were Benedict and Count Kingsley, who used the chaos to secure their own influence. Pushing past his dark thoughts, the Duke rises gracefully from his seat to leave the parlor. As he walks away, the host's laughter echoes behind him along with the words, "Won't this business expand the influence of the House of Benedict even further?" The sun begins to set, casting a warm orange glow over the city's brick buildings. A mysterious figure wearing a dark hood and cloak quietly slips down a secluded alleyway. Pulling back his hood, the Duke's blonde-haired assistant smiles cheerfully, murmuring, "This is troublesome." Meeting with the Duke in the quiet alley, the assistant reports, "That drug your cousin is building his business on." The assistant whines in distress, remembering how the guards strictly warned him, men are not allowed to enter alone. Shuddering at the memory, the assistant desperately begs, "Please don't." The Duke narrows his eyes thoughtfully, his mind turning to the secret masquerade club. Meanwhile, a young lady in a lovely striped dress walks down the quiet brick alleyway. Suddenly, she gasps and covers her mouth in absolute shock as she overhears a secret conversation. Blushing furiously, she quickly turns around and tries to sneak away before anyone notices her. But before she can escape, she bumps right into a tall, cloaked figure standing directly behind her. Looking up, she sees the handsome Duke smiling down at her with a gentle, amused expression. Her heart leaps into her throat as she stares up at him, completely frozen in surprise. He reaches out and gently takes her hands, pulling her close in the quiet alleyway. Rosy pink blushes color her cheeks as she raises a finger to her lips, silently pleading with him to keep their meeting a secret.